Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Good evening, and may the good Lord bless you, brothers and sisters. This is our episode number 2 on our subject, the beast and its image. And at this time, we will focus our attention to Revelation 13, verse 3. And we will try to prove that this prophetic verse did not find its perfect fulfillment in the days of Hotep. And in this study, we need to follow the injunction given by the Shepherd's Rod to be God's real people, logical thinkers, and not bait hunters. 2TG 24, page 23. And also, the statement in 2TG number 6 on page 15 that we must not be superficial readers and thinkers, but let us be deep Bible students. 2TG number 6 on page 15. And also the statement in track number 5 on page 6 saying, do not allow what you have believed or practiced in the past to control your understanding. Track number 5, page 6. Do not allow what you have believed or practiced in the past to control your understanding. Or in other words, in answerer number 2 on page 80, every Christian should remember that as the truth is ever advancing, it will not be found today where it was yesterday, and that therefore Christ's followers must advance with it. They will not follow the examples of the Jews and the Romans. Answerer number 2, page 80. Now, in 1888 message, it says that God will not warn the people to avoid to worship the beast when the beast in reality does not exist. I would like to read a statement. By these plain testimonies, we establish the fact that the beast will be destroyed at the second advent. Therefore, we ask, what danger will there be that men will worship the beast at a time when there will be none for them to worship? God will never send an angel to warn men against the worship of the beast when the beast does not exist. But the Shepherd's Rod plainly told us that the warning message of the third angel is applied to the judgment that pertains to the dead only indirectly. Here in General Conference Special on page 39, it says, in fact, the three angels' messages are applicable to the judgment for the dead only indirectly. For the judgment for the living is the all-important event. That is, the angel is not sent particularly to explain what the judgment does to the dead, but what it is to do to the living. Without any doubts concerning the warning message of the third angel in Revelation 14 verse 9 must have its direct application in the judgment that pertains to the living. And the mere fact that the direct application is in the judgment that pertains to the living can be easily understood that whatever the representation of the beast, in reality, it did exist in the period of the judgment that pertains to the living, rather than in the period of the judgment that pertains to the dead. And if the application of the third angel's message is directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the dead, there is no reason for God that He will not bestow the complete understanding concerning the subject if the beast mentioned in Revelation 14 verse 9 is already in existence in the period of the judgment that pertains to the dead. Otherwise, how could they be able to understand and to avoid such worship if it was not completely unfolded in their lifetime. The prophet says in the Great Controversy 445, saying, the third angel's warning is, if any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. The beast mentioned in this message, whose worship is enforced by the two-horned beast, is the first, or the leopard-like beast of Revelation 13. The papacy. The image to the beast represents that form of apostate Protestantism which will be developed when the Protestant churches shall seek the aid of the civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. The mark of the beast still remains to be defined. That statement, the mark of the beast, still remains to be defined, plainly indicating that whatever the significance of the mark of the beast, it is not fully understood in the days of Sister White. Now, that statement, unrolling of the scroll, in reality is more pertaining to the subject concerning the beast. And I think that is found in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6. Let us read page 17. Now, it says here, the light we have received upon the third angel's message is the true light. The reason that the prophet is emphasizing that the message that God's people receive or concerning the third angel is the only true light, because there are many false lights. Now, I would like to read again that statement in Volume 8, page 194, saying, artificial lights may appear claiming to come from heaven, but they cannot shine forth as the star of holiness, the star of heavenly brightness, to guide the feet of the pilgrim and stranger into the city of God. False lights will take the place of the true, and many souls will be for a time deceived. God forbid that it should be so with us. The true light now shineth, and will light up the souls in which the windows are opened heavenward. Volume 8, page 194. And we know that the true light is the message of the third angel. So the question given in track number 14 on page 22, saying that it is very important that it says here in prophetic utterance is not only a promise to purify the church when modern Assyria is being crushed, but also a suggestive statement as to what constitutes meat in due season for men today, and as to what movement they are to invest in if they would make sure of salvation. Track number 14, page 22. But I would like only to focus to that statement. What constitutes meat in due season? Because in early writings, page 63, it says that there are many precious truths contained in the scriptures, but it is the present truth that the flock needs now. But the question is, what constitutes meat in due season? I think the only answer that can be given is that the message that constitutes the third angel's message, because that is the only true light. All other, it must be a false light, or it is called artificial lights, brothers and sisters. Now, to repeat again, there are two main subjects as far as the third angel's message is thus concerned. And we know that it is concerning, first, the sanctuary doctrine, and second, the beast revelation. So here in Story of Redemption 381, it says, those who had accepted the light concerning the mediation of Christ and the perpetuity of the law of God found that these were the truths brought to view in the third message. Now, I would like to read again. It says, those who had accepted the light concerning the mediation of Christ and the perpetuity of the law of God found that these were the truths brought to view in the third message. So here, brothers and sisters, plainly telling us that one of the main subject of the third angel's message is Christ's mediation in the heavenly sanctuary. And that is the focal point of the deception of Satan to hide the truth concerning the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary, brothers and sisters, or to make it obscure, cancel from the spiritual understanding of God's people. And it is closely connected to the subject, the exceeding great horn in Daniel chapter 8. It's according to verse 11 and verse 12. The exceeding great horn, or which is the instrumentality of the devil to trodden underfoot concerning the daily and the sanctuary, it seems very successful. And it says, practice and prospered, according to Daniel 8 verse 11 and verse 12. And here in track number 4, page 26, it says, note that the truth and the place, not the sanctuary itself, were cast down. That is, both Christ's truth and His place in the earthly sanctuary were set aside so that the knowledge as to His mediatorial work became obscured. So here the prophet is plainly telling, brothers and sisters, that concerning Daniel 8 verse 11 and 12, Satan had been able to successfully set aside, the statement set aside, meaning they were no longer discussing, they were no longer studying, brothers and sisters. And the statement trodden underfoot, if you will read the parables of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 5 to illustrate what does it mean by trodden underfoot. It says, Matthew 5 verse 13, ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost his savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth, or it is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden underfoot of men. Matthew chapter 5 verse 13. Therefore, that figurative speech in Daniel 8 verses 11 and verse 12 can be easily understood that the truth concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary are set aside, according to our reading in track number 4, page 26. Trodden underfoot, meaning it seems that it becomes out of value. That's what's happened, brothers and sisters. And instead to be the theme of salvation, the point of discussion should be focusing to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, Christendom, and apology, brothers and sisters. Even among shepherds and believers, it is undiscussed, and they focus to different subjects by which in reality is not even important, brothers and sisters. The most important subject had been set aside, and that is Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. And the Bible will not tell a lie. It says it practiced and prospered. What had been practiced and what had been prospered? The attitude of God's people that they did not know that Satan is not particular what they believe. Here in 2TG number 30 on page 15, it says, let us once and forever realize that the devil is more shrewd than we can imagine, that he is not particular what you believe, so long as he can keep you ignorant of revealed truth. But the revealed truth mentioned here, for sure, brothers and sisters, is concerning the occurrence in the heavenly sanctuary. Because B.T. Hotep says that there is no more damaging darkness than Satan, here in White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32, saying, it says, let us not However, forget that there is an enemy who is determined to keep God's people in darkness, in ignorance of timely truth. And what more damaging darkness could he seek to keep them in than in ignorance of that which God would have them to know? While their judgment is pending, while they are being weighed in the balances of the sanctuary, none, absolutely none. White House Recruiter, page 31 and page 32. Brothers and sisters, and we repeated several times that according to track number 3, page 54, it says, for when a person's judgment is pending in the heavenly sanctuary, and he is unaware of the fact, he will be unprepared and unable to stand when his case is investigated. And that is the determined effort of the devil, because God granted only mankind 6,000 years provisionary time, according to 1934 edition, track number 3, saying that God gave human being 6,000 years provisionary time. Here in, let's read track number 3 on page, that is 1934 edition and supplement on page 71, saying, therefore, our symbolical number of the Bible time, 600, must be multiplied by 10. Thus, 600 times 10 equals 6,000 years of provisionary time. This proves the length of time Christ will be a Savior for sinners, and that our sinful world will be 6,000 years old when probation closes, and that we are living in the time of the end. Track number 3, 1934 edition, page 71. That in that reading, we can clearly discern, brothers and sisters, that God granted only 6,000 years provisionary time. And the mere fact that in the parable of Jesus Christ in Matthew 24, also Mark 13, that Christ's parable is comparing the occurrence in the days of Noah to the last generation of men, brothers and sisters. And in the days of Noah, God gave them 120 years provisionary time, according to the Bible commentary. But the fact is that when the 6,000 years is about to close, they have no knowledge. They knew it not, brothers and sisters. Here in Bible commentary, I would like to read in 1 BC. This is the statement given by the Voice of Inspiration in page 1088. God granted them 120 years of provision in which to consider, and during that time preached to them through Seth, Enoch, and Noah. They were represented as men shut up in prison. Had they listened to the testimony of these faithful witnesses, had they repented and returned to their loyalty, God would not have destroyed them. God determined to purify the world by a flood. But in mercy, in love, He gave the antediluvians a provision of 120 years. During this time, while the ark was building, the voices of Noah, Methuselah, and many others were heard in warning and entreaty, and every blow struck on the ark was a warning message. Or in other words, here in 1 BC 1088, the statement says that God gave them 120 years of provision in which to consider. They need to consider. But the fact is, they did not consider. But the faithful, according to us, are in page 183, saying, but those who believed the message of Noah went into the ark at a given time, and the door was closed. And it is comparing the close of provision in the church, according to this reading, brothers and sisters. So those who believed the message went into the ark at a given time. There is a given time, and the given time is 120 years. But when the 120 years is about to expire, they continually mock the messenger of God, brothers and sisters. That is the only sign that they need to observe, because concerning the outward appearance, according to the shepherd's rod, there was not even slightest sign of threatening rain. It says here in 1TG number 12, page 27 and page 28, it says, you remember that while Noah was preaching that a destruction would come from the Almighty, he was also preparing a place of refuge, building the ark. Those who doubted Noah's announcement of the flood and who scoffed at the idea that they should enter the ark for safety at a time when there was not even the slightest sign of threatening rain. So there was no slightest sign of threatening rain. The only sign that was given to them is the time, the given time, 120 years. And that is why the last generation of men is even more favorable than in the days of Noah, because the only sign that was given to them is the given time, 120 years. But there was no sign, even the slightest sign of threatening rain. But in our generation, the last generation of men, not only that God gave them provisionary time, but still there are many signs that have been given by God to us, so that we will not be surprised what will happen to the world. Now, here in the Great Controversy 518, it says, the great controversy between Christ and Satan that has been carried forward for nearly 6,000 years is soon to close. And the wicked one redoubles his efforts to defeat the work of Christ in man's behalf and to fasten souls in his snares, to hold the people in darkness and impenitence till the Savior's mediation is ended, and there is no longer a sacrifice for sin is the object which he seeks to accomplish. So in this reading, it is perfectly corroborating to the statement in Winehouse Recruiter, page 31 and page 32, that there is no more damaging darkness that Satan could place God's people in total ignorance concerning Christ's mediation in the heavenly sanctuary, brothers and sisters. And that is why here in 1TG, let's read in 1TG number 51, it says here, I would like to read this reading. 1TG 51, page 5, it says, if the church is not commensurably growing and expanding, then how can she be a living church? And how can she keep up with the signs of the times and with the progress in the sanctuary above? So the most important part in this reading is we need to continue to progress in truth so that we could be able to follow the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary since October 22, 1844. And that's what it means by the description in the Bible that the 144,000, they follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. Brothers and sisters, it is even more pertaining to the proceedings in the heavenly sanctuary. And that is the main objective of Satan, that people would be busy, brothers and sisters, discussing different subjects. It's not particular, so long that he could be able to keep God's people in darkness concerning the most important of all the truths is concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. In 2SR 187, it says here, in the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. 2SR 187, it says, in the sanctuary construction and service is revealed the plan of salvation. And since Satan do not want that God's people could be able to understand concerning the plan of salvation, so it was predicted beforehand that his main target is to trodden underfoot the daily in the sanctuary, brothers and sisters. And the Bible declared clearly that it practiced and prospered. But I would like to read this reading in Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection. Saying here on page 104, it says here, the time of finishing the mystery of God. But that imposture is not to last forever. Thank the Lord. This great truth of the priesthood, ministry, and sanctuary of Christianity is not to be hid forever from the eyes of the church and the world. The mystery of iniquity arose and so hid from the world the mystery of God, that all the world followed it wondering. And then the quotation is Revelation 13 verses 3 and verse 4. So here we can easily discern that the focal point on Revelation 13 verse 3 and 4 is to hide the truth concerning Christ's mediation in the heavenly sanctuary. And the statement, all the world wondered after the beast, that beast we know represents system. And since the Bible made it so plain that all the world followed that system, by which such system is the system employed by Satan, so that the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary will be set aside. According to our reading in tract number 4, page 26, the knowledge concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary was set aside on the earthly sanctuary. Brothers and sisters, it was set aside, and not only set aside, trodden underfoot, meaning they no longer consider such subject as important. It seems it is out of value, and that is why I remember the statement in 2SR that the shepherd's rod is telling that the devil, Satan, is wink their ignorance. Here in 2SR page 92, it says, it is true that people like to be deceived, flattering themselves that they are on the way to heaven, while Satan winks at their ignorance. Brothers and sisters, the ignorance mentioned here is ignorance in reality concerning the plan of salvation by which it is revealed through sanctuary construction and service. And Satan is only laughing in the dark that Sabbath keepers are quarreling, bickering each other on different kinds of subjects. But, brothers and sisters, they were not studying the most important subject in the Bible, brothers and sisters, which is the plan of redemption. In 2SR, I would like to read this reading in 2SR 268. It says here, thus the woman represents a church that keep the commandments of God, which is the moral law, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, ceremonial law, or the plan of salvation revealed in the light of the spirit of prophecy. Revelation 12 verse 17. Now, first of all, we need to understand that according to early writings, page 143, Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, is directly applied to the last generation of the church on earth. So let us read here in early writings, page 143. It says, this remnant existing amid the signs and wonders that usher in the great and terrible day of the Lord is doubtless the remnant of the seed of the woman spoken of in Revelation 12 verse 17, the last generation of the church on earth. So Revelation chapter 12 verse 17 is pointing to the last generation of the church on earth, and it was answered in Spiritual Gifts, book 3, page 26, if you could read that statement in your own leisure time. Plainly telling that the last generation of men, they are those God designs them to be translated to heaven without seeing death. You and I are now living in that generation. We are now living in the last generation of men. And brothers and sisters, I would like to repeat again and again that according to 2SR 261, it says to John the Revelator, was shown the true spiritual church of God in all ages in a symbol of a woman. Or in other words, the shepherd's rod is telling us that if you want to be certain that that movement, that church is God's church, the true church of God, then you need to study it in the symbol of a woman. Because, to repeat again, in 2SR 288, it says, written words can be misconstrued, but symbols cannot, thus making the learned and unlearned to immediately distinguish the difference between truth and error. 2SR 288. And in 2SR page 10, while the enemy has succeeded in confusing the written word, God lightens the earth with these symbolic revelations, and that is truth types and symbols. He makes wise the simple and confounds the prudent. And also concerning the parable in the next paragraph. So here, brothers and sisters, if you want to ascertain clearly the true church of God in all ages, that statement, all ages, of course, without any exemption, and more particularly, to the last generation of men. And here, the shepherd's rod give a complete description concerning the church in Revelation 12 verse 17. Let us read again in 2SR 268. Thus the woman represents a church that keep the commandments of God, which is the moral law, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, ceremonial law, or the plan of salvation revealed in the light of the spirit of prophecy. So, in the upper portion, if you will read the upper portion of 268, it says, therefore, these two temples are types of two sections of the Christian church. Since there are two literal temples, and it says it typifies the two sections of the Christian church with the antitypical sanctuary service. It is made up of these two laws, moral and ceremonial. So, the true church of God in the last generation of men, God bestowed unto them two divine laws to represent the woman. Because the only way that you could be able to ascertain clearly that that is the true church of God, it was shown by God to John the Revelator in a symbol of a woman, brothers and sisters. And the shepherds had made it so plain here in 2SR 268 that that woman can be easily recognized by the two divine laws that had been deposited by God, bestowed by God into that movement, which is the moral law and the ceremonial law. And brothers and sisters, there is no other ceremonial law in the sanctuary service except the Holy Feast. And since the first section of the early Christian church, which is the apostolic church, that woman is the woman which obeyed the Ten Commandments, and at the same time, they observed the ceremonial law which pertaining to the Holy Feast, brothers and sisters. And it is really illogical that we will say that the Holy Feast had been nailed to the cross through the death of Christ, by which supposed to be, if that is the case, then the very first one to know must be the apostles. But why is it the apostles? They observed the Holy Feast even after Jesus Christ ascended to heaven. And that is very plain in Acts of the Apostles. Let me read to you here in Acts of the Apostles. Let's read Acts of the Apostles in page 389 and 390 and 391. It says, 389, Paul greatly desired to reach Jerusalem before the Passover, as he would thus have an opportunity to meet those who should come from all parts of the world to attend the feast. Now, in 390, it says, let's read the statement. Upon receiving warning of the plot, it is pointing to the Jewish people that they were planning to kill Apostle Paul. Upon receiving warning of the plot, Paul decided to go around by way of Macedonia. His plan to reach Jerusalem in time for the Passover services had to be given up, but he hoped to be there at Pentecost. Now then it says in the last part, at Philippi, Paul tarried to keep the Passover. You see, Apostle Paul kept the Passover. Only Luke remained with him, the other members of the company passing on to Troas to await him there. the Philippians were the most loving and true-hearted of the apostles' converts, and during the 8 days of the feast, he enjoyed peaceful and happy communion with them. Acts of the Apostles 389, 390, and 391. Now think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. If the Holy Feast had been nailed to the cross, can you imagine Apostle Paul? Together with all the converts, they were observing the Passover feast and then the Pentecost. Think it thoroughly, my dear brothers and sisters. And the Bible made it so plain in Hosea chapter 2, as explained by the shepherd's rod, that this holy feast had been taken out in the church by the exceeding great horn. First in the second section, brothers and sisters, which is the papacy. Now, let us read 2TG number 6. It says here in 2TG number 6 on page 20 and page 21. And it is concerning Hosea chapter 2, verses 8 to 12. It says, from these verses, we see that it was just such a departure from God that caused the church in her early Christian era to lose her path and all her possessions, including her feast days, her new moons, her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. This is exactly what happened when the dark ages of religion began. The pagans in whose clutches the church fell were no more to blame for the church going into darkness than were the Chaldeans of destroying Judah and her temple. The real blame falls on the church herself. And this should be a lasting lesson to each of us, that we should never again have illicit connection with the world, should never depart from the Lord. 2TG number 6, page 20 and page 21. Now in track number 4, this is the statement in pages 25 and page 26. It says, Hosea chapter 2, verse 9 to 11. Just as God chastened here in olden time by permitting Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to abolish the ceremonial system by destroying ancient Jerusalem and its temple, just so did he chasten here in the Christian era by permitting Rome to gain control over her and to supplant her through religious system by a counterfeit, a pagan priesthood, and a pagan Sabbath. Then was his word fulfilled. I will also cause all her mirth to cease, her feast days, her new moons, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn feasts. Since these ordinances, her feast days, her Sabbaths, etc., were part of a compacted prophecy of the gospel, a presentation in which were bound up the promises of redemption, the Acts of the Apostle, page 14. And since Hosea's symbolization has brought us into the Christian era, the ceasing of the ordinances therefore typifies Rome supplanting the truth. Daniel also was shown that this was to be accomplished through Rome, the exceeding great horn, which cast down to the ground the truth and the place of Christ's sanctuary. Daniel 8 verse 12 and 11. Note that the truth and the place, not the sanctuary itself, were cast down. That is, both Christ's truth and his place in the earthly sanctuary were set aside, so that the knowledge as to his mediatorial work became obscured. Now think it thoroughly, brothers and sisters. Track number 4, pages 25 and page 26. I would like to remind again and again that according to track number 3 on page 39, it says here, and as the great horn of the he-goat is symbolical of the Roman world, represented by iron in Daniel 2 verse 40, in its 3 periods, pagan, ecclesiastical, and Protestant. Also, as in its second period, it threw the truth and the host underfoot and polluted the sanctuary by bringing in the abominations while it practiced and prospered. Daniel 8 verse 12. The 2,300-day period accordingly extends beyond the fall of ecclesiastical Rome and reaches into the Protestant period. Now, brothers and sisters, let us study closely. The shepherd's rod made it so plain that if the daily and the sanctuary had been trodden underfoot in its second period, it will also trodden underfoot in the last period of the exceeding great horn, represented the Protestant period. So it was predicted beforehand that the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot by the exceeding great horn in the Protestant period, brothers and sisters. If it was trodden underfoot in the ecclesiastical period of the exceeding great horn during the dark ages of religion, it will be trodden underfoot as well in the Protestant period, as far as the Bible is thus concerned, brothers and sisters. Remember, Daniel chapter 8 can never be applied in the period of pagan Rome, brothers and sisters, concerning how the exceeding great horn trodden underfoot the daily and in the sanctuary. Now, let's go back again to our subject, because we have a separate study concerning the exceeding great horn. Our subject is concerning the beast and its image. Now, it is only through the power of the third angel's message. I would like to read, brothers and sisters, here in 2SR page 139. It says here, the horn bears rule over all the earth. 2SR 139. So it was predicted beforehand that the exceeding great horn shall bear rule over all the earth. So that is the main subject, brothers and sisters. The horn shall bear rule over all the earth. Found in Daniel chapter 2. Verse 39. Now, since we could never be able to understand the book of Daniel unless we connect it to the book of Revelation, and also the book of Revelation can never be understood unless it should be connected to the book of Daniel. Both of them must be joined together to obtain the whole truth, brothers and sisters. Now, let us read 2SR 139. It says here, the horn bears rule over all the earth. And it says, 2SR 139 and 140. In order to fully comprehend what is being taught in this chapter, we again call attention to the chart on page 128. So, BT Hotep is trying to admonish us that we need to observe the chart on page 128. Brothers and sisters. Now let us continue. It says, now let us follow the chart along with the reading. In the foregoing study, it is proven that the exceeding great horn of the goat does not represent imperial Rome only, but also papal Rome and the present world as well. What is the present world? BT Hotep declared. And the present world as well. In 2SR 112, I would like to read a statement. Therefore, if this beast represents our world at the present time, so that is the only portion that I would like to read at this time. 2SR 112. Therefore, if this beast, the scarlet-colored beast, represents our world at the present time, so the present world is represented by the scarlet-colored beast, according to that reading in 2SR page 112. Now, let's go back to 2SR page 139. It says, in the foregoing study, it is proven that the exceeding great horn of the goat does not represent imperial Rome only, but also papal Rome and the present world as well. Because if you will attach here in the beast study, it must be saying that the exceeding great horn of the goat does not represent the two stages of the nondescript beast, but as well as the scarlet-colored beast. And then it says, let's read again. In the foregoing study, it is proven that the exceeding great horn of the goat does not represent imperial Rome only, but also papal Rome and the present world as well. For the horn first persecuted Christ and his followers under the jurisdiction of the Roman monarchy. The truth expressed by the daily in the sanctuary were trodden down by reason of transgression in the period of the broken state of Rome up to 508 AD. Or in other words, the situation is the same on the first stage of the exceeding great horn had not the Jews come to the full, what full? Full apostasy. The statement in 2SR page 126, I would like to read 127. He was to stand up when the transgressor come to the full. The Christians have never been anything but transgressors. Therefore, the reference can be applied only to the Jewish nation, at which time the once favored people of God would have exceeded any previous record of both moral and spiritual corruption. The Jewish nation reached that condition at the time of the ascendancy of Rome in the first advent of Christ. Therefore, this king of first countenance is the Roman monarchy after the transgressor, the Jews, had come to their full. Or in other words, unless the Jewish nation will come to the full apostasy, there is no possibility that the Roman monarchy will be established. So when the Roman monarchy had been established in 27 BC, the spiritual side is plainly telling us that the Jewish people were already in full apostasy. And the same with this statement in 2SR 139 that if the Ephesus, the first candlestick in chapter 1, did not reach to that condition, complete apostasy, by which the shepherd's rod called it by reason of transgression, can be applied only to the first candlestick in Revelation chapter 1, which is the Ephesus, brothers and sisters. Because of such great apostasy, the papacy had been established. And that second instrument of the exceeding great horn, by which point to the devil, had been able to successfully trodden underfoot the daily and the sanctuary, brothers and sisters. And that one, it means in 2TG number 6, page 20 and page 21, because of the departure from God, by which causes the church to lose her possessions, more particularly both moral and ceremonial law, which is pointing to the holy feast, not the burnt offerings, because there was no Christian church, more particularly to the early Christian church, that they observed the burnt offerings, brothers and sisters, because all of them know it that the burnt offerings ended to the cross when Jesus Christ sacrificed his life. Brothers and sisters. So here in the Great Controversy, page 49, I would like to read the reading. It says here, the Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, foretold the great apostasy which would result in the establishment of the papal power. He declared that the day of Christ should not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposed and exalted himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God seated in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And furthermore, the apostle warns his brethren that the mystery of iniquity that already worked. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, verse 4 and 7. Even that early date, he saw creeping into the church errors that would prepare the way for the development of the papacy. But I would like to generalize the word errors by the term private interpretation, because that's what causes the errors, because of private interpretation, brothers and sisters. When the apostle died, then the early Christian church began to interpret the word of God privately without the aid of inspiration. And that's what causes the preparation of the papacy to establish in the church. And the result was the daily and the sanctuary had been trodden underfoot. Now let us go back again to SR page 139. It says here, let's go back to the statement. In the foregoing study, it is proven that the exceeding great horn of the goat does not represent imperial Rome only, but also papal Rome, and the present world as well. For the horn first persecuted Christ and his followers under the jurisdiction of the Roman monarchy. The truth expressed by the daily in the sanctuary were trodden down by reason of transgression in the period of the broken state of Rome up to 508 AD. Because in 508 AD, the truth expressed by the daily and the sanctuary were no longer trodden underfoot, but rather it was taken out. Therefore, let us distinctly separate the period by which the truth expressed by the daily and the sanctuary were trodden underfoot, and then the period by which it is no longer trodden underfoot, but it was completely taken out, brothers and sisters. Now, let us read again the statement here in 2SR 139. The truth expressed by the daily and the sanctuary were trodden down by reason of transgression in the period of the broken state of Rome up to 508 AD. For the imperial government came to an end in the year 476 AD. Furthermore, the papal power treads God's truth on the ground up to the termination of the prophetic 1260 years and ended with the imprisonment of the Pope in 1798. But the sanctuary and the daily were held to the ground by the great horn up to 1844. At that time, he lost control of them, and the power of the three angels' messages raised the truth from the ground or from underfoot and placed it in the church. Therefore, the great horn is a symbol of the entire New Testament period to the second coming of Christ, corresponding with the legs of iron and the feet and toes of the great image of Daniel chapter 2. Now let us focus first to the statement that through the power of the three angels' messages, raise the truth from the ground, from underfoot, and place it in the church. What does it mean, brothers and sisters? It can be easily understood that through the power of the message of the third angel, the devil had no longer been able to hide the truth concerning these sanctuary services or the mediatorial work of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary in 1844. And such knowledge, brothers and sisters, is bestowed by God to the church, and that is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, why is it that the Shepherd's Rod says that the three angels' messages are more directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the living? In General Conference Special, page 39. That is very plain, right? The three angels' messages is more directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the living. Let's read again. It says, in fact, the three angels' messages are applicable to the judgment for the dead only indirectly. For the judgment for the living is the all-important event. That is, the angel is not sent particularly to explain what the judgment does to the dead, but what it is to do to the living. General Conference Special, page 39. Brothers and sisters, that statement can be easily understood. The direct application of that message of the third angel's message is in the judgment that pertains to the living, by which the focal point of the message of the third angel is to raise up the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary. Now, concerning the daily, that is pertaining to the moral law. And we know that it was already restored in the days of Sister White and B.T. Houghton. But how about the sanctuary truth? Does the sanctuary truth been completely restored in the days of Sister White and B.T. Houghton? Now, if the sanctuary truth had been completely restored in the days of Sister White and B.T. Houghton, in the judgment that pertains to the living, when the judgment for the living will begins, then what truth does the third angel's message will restore? By which in reality it is even more directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the living. But we will prove to you, brothers and sisters, in this study, the judgment that pertains to the living is the direct application of the third angel, because at that time, that is the complete restoration concerning the sanctuary truth, my dear brothers and sisters. Now, I would like to read 2SR page 139. It says, the Bible is the revelation of creation and redemption in Christ, Creator and Redeemer. Therefore, the Sabbath and the sanctuary constitute the truth. It doesn't mean that if you will say the Sabbath is pertaining only to the fourth commandment. The reason that the one that had been mentioned here is the Sabbath, because that is the grand fulcrum of the Ten Commandments, brothers and sisters. Now, I would like to read to you this reading in Spiritual Gifts, Book 3, on page 26. And do not forget that Revelation 12:17, according to our reading in Early Writings, page 143, the direct application is in the last generation of the church on earth. Do not forget that. I would like to repeat again. According to Early Writings 143, Revelation 12:17 is applied to the last generation of the church on earth. Now, I would like to read to you here in Spiritual Gifts, Book 3, page 26. Revelation chapter 12, verse 17, it says, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ." The woman is a symbol of the church, and the remnant of the church represents the Christians of the last generation of men, living just prior to the second advent. The dragon makes war on these for keeping the commandments of God, Sabbath and all. So not only Sabbath, but all. And having the testimony of Jesus Christ, which according to the inspired definition of Revelation chapter 19, verse 10, is the spirit of prophecy. Here then are the causes of the dragon's warfare upon the remnant. They teach the observance of the 10 Commandments and the revival of the gifts, and acknowledge the gift of prophecy among them. When the devil got one foot upon the fourth commandment, or in other words, in the Sunday keeping Christian, the devil trodden underfoot the fourth commandment. That even though the fourth commandment is recorded in the Bible, but it is not regarded by Sunday keepers as essential to salvation, and it was set aside from their understanding. And it says here, let us read again, "When the devil got one foot upon the fourth commandment, and the other upon the gifts planted in the Christian church by Jesus Christ." But among Sabbath keepers, his other foot, trodden underfoot, the gift of prophecy, the prophetic gift. And we will study closely how the devil been able to successfully trodden underfoot concerning the gift of prophecy. Let us read again. It says, "When the devil got one foot upon the fourth commandment, and the other upon the gifts planted in the Christian church by Jesus Christ, then his satanic majesty was filled with revengeful delight. But when the remnant, when God designs to fit for translation to heaven without seeing death, as for the old paths, where is the good way, and walk therein, then the dragon is wroth, and makes war on them." Spiritual Gifts, Book 3, page 26. Now, let us go back again to our study, brothers and sisters. Why is it that the third angel's message is directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the living? The only answer that can be given is that in the judgment that pertains to the living, that is the time, the predicted event by which the entire truth concerning the sanctuary, the daily and the sanctuary, will be completely unfolded and restored. And in consecrated way to Christian perfection, let us go back again to the reading on page 104. It says, "The time of finishing the mystery of God, but that imposture is not to last forever. Thank the Lord. This great truth of the priesthood, ministry, and sanctuary of Christianity is not to be hid forever." It says here. And it says, "From the eyes of the church in the world, the mystery of iniquity arose, and so hid from the world the mystery of God, that all the world followed its wandering." Now, whatever the significance that all the world wandered after the beast, according to this reading, the focal point is that the devil divert the attention of all the people to follow that system, brothers and sisters, in order to set aside Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. That is the only purpose why the devil is leading the people to follow after the beast, after that system, because beast represent system. And the mere fact that the leopard-like beast has 10 horns, it must be a universal system, meaning such system has been universally followed throughout the whole world, brothers and sisters. Now, I would like to read that statement to us, our page 86. It says, let's read the statement. "Inasmuch as the lion, the bear, the four-headed leopard, and the nondescript beast, the symbols of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome are linked to each other. The unbreakable chain of beasts make it impossible for another universal beast, meaning system, to intersect their consecutive order. Consequently, the leopard-like beast of Revelation 13 verse 1 to 9 must follow the nondescript beast Rome, represented by Rome. 2SR page 86. So the voice of inspiration says, brothers and sisters, that beast represents system. Now, to repeat again, brothers and sisters, the determined effort of the devil is to hide the truth concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, by which the plan of salvation, the plan of redemption had been revealed. He employed all manner of deception. In the shepherd's rod, called it complete satanic scheme in 1SR 214. And the principal objective of Satan is to divert their attention to anything rather than to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. Now, I would like to read this reading in Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection. I would like to read again. But that imposture is not to last forever. Thank the Lord. This great truth of the priesthood, ministry, and sanctuary of Christianity is not to be hid forever from the eyes of the church and the world. It says, the mystery of iniquity arose, so hid from the world the mystery of God, that all the world followed it wandering. Now they are wandering that system so that they could not be able to have understanding concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. And it says, but the day comes when the mystery of iniquity shall be exposed, and the mystery of God in its own truth and purity shall shine forth once more, never more to be hid, but to accomplish its great purpose and be completely finished. For it is written that in the days of the voice of the seventh angel, when he shall begin to sound, the mystery of God should be finished, as yet declared to his servants, the prophets. Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection, plainly telling us, brothers and sisters, that there is an appointed time, saying, but the day comes when the mystery of iniquity shall be exposed. For sure, brothers and sisters, the mystery of iniquity is pointing to Satan, to the devil, brothers and sisters. And there is no other medium chosen by God to expose such deception of the mystery of iniquity. According to 2SR page 10, I would like to read to you. While the enemy has succeeded in confusing the written word, God lightens the earth with his glory by these symbolic revelations, and by which he discloses the entire truth and uncovers the traps of the devil. The statement uncovers the traps of the devil is the same with the statement in Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection, expose the deception of Satan, brothers and sisters. Now, let us now study closely the beast revelation, because this is the chosen medium employed by God to uncover the traps of the devil, to expose. Now, let us go back first to the third angel's message. The third angel's message is the last message. In volume 5, page 206 and 207, I would like to read this reading. The third angel of Revelation 14 is represented as flying swiftly through the midst of heaven, crying, here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Here is shown the nature of the work of the people of God. They have a message of so great importance that they are represented as flying in the presentation of it to the world. They are holding in their hands the bread of life for a famishing world. The love of Christ constraineth them. This is the last message. There are no more to follow, no more invitations of mercy to be given after this message shall have done its work. What a trust! What a responsibility is resting upon all to carry the words of gracious invitation. And the Spirit and the bride say, come, and let him that heareth say, come, and let him that is athirst come, and whosoever will, let him take the water of life freely. Volume 5, page 206 and 207. So the voice of inspiration says that the third angel's message is flying in the midst of heaven. It is pointing to a movement. God's people who are proclaiming the message through internet, because that is the chosen medium of God to be employed to finish the work. According to 2SR 229, I would like to read that reading. It says, God's servants shall have no time or desire for the cares of this world, for there is a city prepared for them whose builder and maker is God. As we have just enough time to get ready for translation, we must not let the enemy steal our precious moments. Because the work is so broad, its expansion so vast, and its importance so great, God has inspired modern science to invent and build speedy equipment to quickly finish His work. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Many shall be purified and made white and tried. But the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. Daniel 12 verse 4 and verse 10. And in White House Recruiter, on page 36, let's read. Because time and the gospel are at their climactic hour, and the work is consequently of transcendent scope, expansion, and importance, yet of exceeding short duration. God has inspired man to invent and build time and labor-saving, wonder-working, earth-mastering tools and machinery of all kinds, marvel which would have staggered the imagination and beggared the credulity of former generations, notwithstanding the centuries aforehand, the high and lofty one that inhabit eternity. Isaiah 57 verse 15 declared, But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Daniel 12 verse 4. So those passages plainly telling us that it is God who inspired this modern science to invent speedy technology to communicate from one nation to other nation. And that is the chosen medium by God. It was already His divine plan to quickly finish the work through internet. And 1,000 years ago, the vision was shown by God to John the Revelator that the three angels' message are flying in the midst of heaven, meaning their message is proclaimed through internet. And brothers and sisters, the statement in volume 5, page 206, saying that the third angel's message is the last message, is pertaining to the final phase of the third angel, which is the judgment for the living. Now, I would like to read General Conference Special, page 39 and page 40. So we see that the more we consider the subject, the more obvious becomes the truth that the third angel's message in its final phase is the judgment for the living, the harvest. Plainly then, the work of Elijah is to give light on the judgment for the living. General Conference Special, page 39 and page 40. And it says that the final phase of the third angel's message is the judgment for the living, not the judgment for the dead. And then it says that it is antitypical Elijah the Tishbite that will explain completely concerning the judgment for the living, brothers and sisters. Now, let us go back again to our subject. We already explained, brothers and sisters, that the direct application of the third angel is in the judgment for the living. And the purpose of the third angel is to raise the truth from the ground of being trodden underfoot and place it in the church, brothers and sisters. And that statement in 2SR 139 in reality is more directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the living, because there was no recorded in the writings of Sister White and B.T. Hotep that in the days of Sister White as well as in the days of B.T. Hotep that the sanctuary truth had been completely restored in their lifetime. And as a matter of fact, brothers and sisters, accordingly, in 2SR 139, let's read again the statement here, in 2SR page 139. The Bible is the revelation of creation and redemption in Christ, Creator and Redeemer. Therefore, the Sabbath and the sanctuary constitute the truth. See Hebrews chapter 9 verse 10, Hebrews chapter 4 verse 4 to 10. Thus, these two doctrines are coupled together, cannot be separated, and bear the whole truth. So, here the shepherd's rod is plainly telling us that, no, if you are only observing the Sabbath and apart from the knowledge concerning the sanctuary truth, you did not bear the whole truth, brothers and sisters. And then it says in 2SR page 139, how do we keep the sanctuary truth? It is kept not in type but in antitype. Now, I would like to focus first to the Passover. Now here in 2SR 139, it says, how do we keep the sanctuary truth? It is kept not in type, but in antitype. By faith, we believe that Christ, our high priest in the heavenly sanctuary, is officiating in our behalf, as it was taught in type by the earthly sanctuary built by Moses. As Israel complied with the requirements of each service in the type, so must in the antitype. Thus, we proclaim the truth, Sabbath and sanctuary, more fully. Now, let us focus to the statement that the sanctuary, it is not kept in type, but in antitype. What period does the antitypical period begins? Now, I would like to read first 2SR, I think 2SR 218 and 219. 2SR 218, it says, in the earthly sanctuary, the high priest entered the most holy apartment once a year. And on that particular day, every Israelite was to confess his sin. He who neglected to comply with the divine requirements was cut off from his people. See Leviticus 23 verse 29 and 30. Thus, the day of antitypical atonement, judgment, or cleansing of the sanctuary, as set forth in Daniel 8 verse 14, is a day of purification for the camp of Israel, the church, putting away sin and sinners. The earthly sanctuary was a figure of the heavenly. See Hebrews 9 verse 23 and 24. It was instituted with its ceremonial system to point forward to the work of Christ, our high priest in the heavenly sanctuary, during the antitypical period, New Testament time. As the sanctuary with all its services was a figure or type of the true, which is the heavenly, under the administration of Christ, so the typical Day of Atonement must point out the truth in the antitypical period, our time. Now, we need not to study closely these prophecy, brothers and sisters. For sure, brothers and sisters, the ceremonial system had never been established while God's people were still in Egypt. That ceremonial system of worship was established by God in the wilderness, by which at the time when such ceremonial system had been established, instead of the priesthood is given to the firstborn sons, it was given to the Levites because of such apostasy that occurred in the wilderness, brothers and sisters. Now, let us study closely the statement given by the shepherd's rod. The sanctuary truth is kept not in type, but in antitype. Let us focus our attention to this statement, in antitype. We already read in 2SR 218 and 219 that the antitypical period is the New Testament period. The New Testament period. Now, let us now study the statement saying that the sanctuary truth must be kept in antitype and not in type. And the antitypical period begins in the New Testament period, 2SR 218 and 219. Now, since the shepherd's rod, I would like to focus first to the temple's type. Now, here in 2SR 268, let us go back again. Therefore, these two temples are types of two sections of the Christian church, with the antitypical sanctuary service made up of these two laws, moral and ceremonial. This statement of the shepherd's rod is very plain. There must be two sections of the Christian church by which unto them was bestowed the moral and ceremonial law. The first section of the Christian church from the crucifixion, so that is the apostolic church, it says to about 538 AD, was endowed with just such a sanctuary, that is, they had a perfect knowledge of the work in the heavenly to that time, and their faith corresponded with its service. So their faith corresponded with its service, according to this reading, brothers and sisters. What does it mean? That if in the heavenly sanctuary, that is Day of Atonement, then on the earth, their faith corresponded with its service. What is the service of the Day of Atonement? They perform it. Brothers and sisters, I would like to read first 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 8, beginning from verse 7. Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened. For even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast not with old leaven, neither with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So here the apostle is plainly telling the Corinthians that we need to keep the Passover. We need to keep the feast, brothers and sisters. No longer with burnt offerings, because our Passover is Jesus Christ. He sacrificed His life once and forever. But it doesn't mean, according to this reading, that Jesus Christ died on the cross, that the Passover is no longer to be kept. But rather, we need to keep the Passover feast. No more burnt offerings, no more animal sacrifices, but we need to keep the feast, according to this reading, with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So, the Holy Feast must be pointing to feasting the Word of God or studying the Word of God. That is the appointed time given by God, by which God's people will focus their attention to study the Word of God. I would like to read to you here in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2. And here in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, 573, it says, God gave directions to the Israelites to assemble before Him at set periods in the place which He should choose and observe special days wherein no unnecessary work was to be done, but the time was to be devoted to a consideration of the blessings which He had bestowed upon them. Now, I would like to read again. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, 573. God gave direction to the Israelites to assemble before Him at set periods. The statement set periods meaning appointed periods of time. And that is the Holy Feast. In the place which He should choose and observe special days wherein no unnecessary work was to be done, but the time was to be devoted to a consideration of the blessings which He had bestowed upon them. Now in 574, it says, God requires no less of His people in these last days in sacrifices and offerings than He did of the Jewish nation. Those whom He has blessed with the competency, and even the widow and the fatherless, should not be unmindful of His blessings. Especially should those whom God has prospered render to Him the things that are His. They should appear before Him with a spirit of self-sacrifice and bring their offerings in accordance with the blessings which He had bestowed upon them. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters. And then it says here in 575, let all who possibly can attend these yearly gatherings. All should feel that God requires this of them. So there must be yearly gatherings that have been given by God to His people, and there is no other recorded in the Bible, brothers and sisters. That is the Holy Feast, monthly Sabbath and yearly Sabbaths. Now, let us now focus our attention to the statement recorded in the writings of Sister White and B.T. Hotep, which is unholy feast. Christians choose Sunday as the rest of the day. For sure, that is unholy feast. Now, how about us, the Bedean? All the Bedeans, they have their yearly gatherings. Would you think it is not the same with the Sunday keepers? They trodden underfoot the fourth commandment because, yes, they have a rest day. In 1 week, they have rest day, but they are the one who choose, and they choose Sunday. Now, how about us? Why is it? No one can deny the fact. All the Bedeans, they have their yearly gatherings. But the question is that yearly gatherings, is it God who appointed that yearly gatherings? Or we are the one who choose that month, brothers and sisters, that date? And would you think it's not a part of the unholy feast? Now let us go back to our subject, brothers and sisters. The shepherd's rod made it so plain that the sanctuary truth, brothers and sisters, will be observed in the antitype. It will be kept in the antitype and not in the type. If you will look at, brothers and sisters, to the historical event, I would like to read in Patriarchs and Prophets. Let us read, brothers and sisters. Here in Patriarchs and Prophets, 406, it says, in the wilderness, for nearly 40 years, the children of Israel are lost to view in the obscurity of the desert. The space, says Moses, in which we came from Kadesh Barnea until we were come over the brook Zerd, was 38 years, until all the generation of the men of war were wasted out from among the hosts, as the Lord sware unto them. For indeed, the hand of the Lord was against them to destroy them from among the hosts until they were consumed. Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 14 and 15. During these years, so during that 38 years, the people were constantly reminded that they were under the divine rebuke. In the rebellion at Kadesh, they had rejected God, and God had for the time rejected them. Since they had proved unfaithful to His covenant, they were not to receive the sign of the covenant, the rite of circumcision. Their desire to return to the land of slavery had showed them to be unworthy of freedom, and the ordinance of the Passover instituted to commemorate the deliverance from bondage was not to be observed. Patriarchs and Prophets 406. So that is the historical event by which at the time when they were in the wilderness, they were prohibited by God to observe the Passover feast. Why? Because of the rebellion, brothers and sisters. Now, let us read again, brothers and sisters, on 1SR page 68. I would like to read. It says, the Exodus movement is in a way a type photograph of the closing work of God under the Advent movement. Each movement rises in fulfillment of time prophecy. The fact that Israel after the flesh is a type photograph, their experience must be duplicated by the true, otherwise there can be no type. So the experience of God's people, the Exodus movement, must be duplicated by the true, brothers and sisters, by the true object. Now, I would like to go back again to the experience of God's people while they were still in Egypt. Everybody knew that they were in Egyptian bondage for 215 years. From the time when Jacob entered into Egypt in 1706 BC to 1491 BC, there were 215 years in Egyptian bondage. And during that period of time, it alters the impossibility for them to observe the holy feast because they lost sight of the creation calendar. And that is why when God visited His people, the Bible is very plain in Exodus chapter 5. Let's read again. Exodus chapter 5. On verses 1 and 2 it says, and afterward Moses and Aaron went in and told Pharaoh, thus said the Lord, God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast unto me in the wilderness. So the purpose why God take out His people from Egyptian bondage is to observe the feast in the wilderness. Why is it that it is in the wilderness? Historically, according to Patriarchs and Prophets 757, I would like to read, in the command for Israel's release. So the command for Israel's release, and also recorded in Patriarchs and Prophets page 258. Now, it says here, in the command for Israel's release, the Lord said to Pharaoh, Israel is my son, even my firstborn. Let my son go, that he may serve me. Exodus 4 verse 22 and 23. The psalmist tells us why God delivered Israel from Egypt. He brought forth His people with joy and His chosen with gladness and gave them the lands of the heathen. And they inherited the labor of the people, that they might observe His statutes and keep His laws. Psalms 105 verse 43 to verse 45. Here we learn that the Hebrews could not serve God in Egypt. So that is very plain, brothers and sisters, that God's people cannot observe the feast while they were in the Egyptian bondage. And that is the reason that God take out His people from Egypt, to observe the feast in the wilderness. But what happened when they arrived to the wilderness? Because of the rebellion, because of their continual murmuring, instead of observing the feast in the wilderness, they had been prohibited by God. According to Patriarchs and Prophets 406, as quoted in Daniel in Deuteronomy chapter 2 verse 14 and 15. And that is the reason, brothers and sisters, that here in 2SR 139, it says, how do we keep the sanctuary truth? It is kept not in type, but in antitype. The sanctuary truth, it is kept in antitype. Now, I would like to emphasize this clearly, brothers and sisters, and I hope God would help me to that I could be able to explain this subject in a more clear manner, brothers and sisters. I would like to emphasize again, the third angel's message is directly applied in the judgment that pertains to the living. Why? First, the third angel is, the message of the third angel, the focal point, is pointing to the mediation of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. Story of Redemption, page 381. Why is it that it is directly applied to the judgment that pertains to the living? Because accordingly, in 2TG number 12, page 30, they are the people that they need to know that their cases are on trial. Where? In the heavenly sanctuary. And that is the determined effort of the devil, according to White House Recruiter 31 and 32, to keep them in ignorance of timely truth. What timely truth? Brothers and sisters, that is the time when their judgment is pending in the heavenly sanctuary, at the time when they are being weighed in the balances of the sanctuary, and they have no knowledge, they remain in darkness, brothers and sisters, then Satan had been able to successfully deceive them. And that statement cannot be applied to the judgment that pertains to the dead, because at the time when their cases are on trial, according to answerer number 3, page 6, they were lying unconscious in their grave. So it must be pertain to the living, because when their cases are on trial, they were living, brothers and sisters. And Satan tried at the utmost of his ability to darken their understanding concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. But thank God, the third angel's message, there are two main subjects concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, and second, the beast revelation. The beast revelation cometh from God, and it is the chosen medium of God to uncover the traps of the devil, to completely expose the deception of the devil, how he had been able to successfully trodden underfoot the knowledge concerning the daily and the sanctuary. And to repeat again, the shepherd's rod explained clearly that, brothers and sisters, the exceeding great horn is divided into three divisions: pagan, ecclesiastical, and the Protestant period. Track number 3, page 39. In these three periods of time, Satan had been able to successfully trodden underfoot the daily and the sanctuary. In the first period, pagan Rome, he had been able to successfully hide from their understanding that such Levitical priesthood is only a pattern of the true priesthood in the heavenly sanctuary. But their eyes had been darkened, focusing only to the type and no knowledge at all to the antitype, the true sanctuary in the heavenly sanctuary. But thank God, there is still a church, a group of people by which they have knowledge concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, and that is the apostolic church. And the apostles imparted such knowledge to the Ephesus, the first candlestick in Revelation chapter 1, because the apostles or the apostolic church, that is the second candlestick in Revelation 11 verse 3. Revelation 11 verse 3, there are two candlesticks, and according to 2SR 284, the first candlestick is the Jewish church and the second candlestick is the apostolic church. Now the Ephesus, the first candlestick in Revelation chapter 1, to them was imparted by the apostles the knowledge concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, and more particular to Apostle Paul, because of all the apostles, Apostle Paul has more knowledge than all others concerning the sanctuary doctrine, as recorded in Hebrews chapter 9. But when the apostles, all of them died, brothers and sisters, they lost sight of such sanctuary services in the heavenly sanctuary. And then what happened, brothers and sisters? The papacy trodden underfoot concerning such knowledge in the heavenly sanctuary. That is the second period. But our subject is concerning the Protestant period, because here in 2SR 139, it was predicted beforehand that it is during the brass kingdom by which the horn bears rule over all the earth. The statement, the horn bears rule over all the earth, meaning the brass kingdom, brothers and sisters, that is the period of time by which in reality the knowledge concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary had been completely trodden underfoot, brothers and sisters. Now, I would like to read here in 2SR 139. It says, the brass kingdom is accepted to represent Grecia, but the fact is that Grecia never did bear rule over all the earth. Remember, the main subject in this chapter is concerning how the exceeding great horn trodden underfoot the daily and the sanctuary. Brothers and sisters, concerning the daily and the sanctuary. And it was predicted beforehand that it is the brass kingdom. But the shepherd's rod is plainly telling that if the brass kingdom is pointing to Grecia, the fact is that Grecia never did bear rule over all the earth. The most distant point of the compass reached by Alexander the Great was a portion of India. Neither did Imperial Rome bear rule over all the earth. What then? Is Daniel wrong in the interpretation of the dream? If there is any error, Daniel cannot be at fault. The responsibility would be naturally fall on God, who was the overseer of all the writings and the interpretation of the scriptures. If Daniel had made a mistake, it was God's duty to have him correct it. But as God is perfect in all his work, he cannot allow error in his holy word. Daniel is correct and in his interpretation, and the brass kingdom must be ruled over all the earth. For all else may fail, but God's word shall stand forever. Now, what does it mean that the brass kingdom shall be ruled over all the earth? Remember, brothers and sisters, in our study in track number 2, page 13, let us read. It says, so being of brass, the mountains denote that the church which they symbolize is in period number 3. And the fact that there is a third period presupposes two preceding periods, making in all 3 great divisions of time. The first from creation to the flood, and the second from the flood to the crucifixion of Christ, and the third from the crucifixion to his second coming. The Christian era is therefore the one to which the symbolical mountains of brass apply. But it is pertaining to the work of God. But we are studying the work of Satan, exceeding great horn. But the divine principle is the same, showing that the brass kingdom pointing to the third period, numerical value number 3. That the exceeding great horn is divided into 3 periods: pagan Rome, ecclesiastical Rome, and then Protestant period. And the shepherd is trying to explain unto us that it is pointing to Revelation 13 verse 3. Ponder deeply, brothers and sisters. Let us read the Bible and then go back again to SR. Revelation 13 verse 3. Here in the Bible, Revelation 13 verse 3, it says, and I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed. And all the world wondered after the beast. Now, it was arranged perfectly. First, brothers and sisters, pointing to the event when one of his heads were wounded to death. And second, when the deadly wound was healed. And then, all the world wondered after the beast. Or in other words, that predicted event that all the world wondered after the beast can never be fulfilled, not until the wound was healed. Now let us focus first to the statement, all the world wondered after the beast. Revelation 13 verse 3, brothers and sisters. Our understanding on Revelation 13 must be in perfect harmony with the book of Daniel. As a matter of fact, the divine principle is that the revelation is not the prophecy of itself. That is the statement in 2SR page 221. We have stated before that the book of Revelation is a revealing of prophecies and not a prophecy of itself. 2SR page 221. Now, the book of Revelation is not a prophecy of itself, but rather it is a revelation of the prophecy recorded in the Old Testament. But when it pertains to the beast revelation, there is no other book in the Old Testament that God gave beast revelation except Daniel. Now, since our subject is concerning the beast revelation, so whatever the revelation in Revelation chapter 13, it must be a revelation to the book of Daniel. Now, let us analyze closely as explained by the shepherd's rod. The shepherd's rod made it so plain, brothers and sisters, that pagan Rome did not bear rule over all the earth. But pagan Rome is a universal empire because it was enumerated one by one, brothers and sisters, in the Shepherd's Rod. I think more than 10 passages in the Shepherd's Rod telling that the first four beasts in the book of Daniel are universal empire, brothers and sisters, right? And here in 2SR 118, it says, as it has reference to the entire world's history under sin, we must consider the number of universal empires or periods since the world began. There is one before the flood, as previously explained. The second is Babylon, the third Medo-Persia, fourth Grecia, and the fifth is the Roman monarchy. 2SR 118. Now, I would like to go to the bottom of the matter, brothers and sisters. What does it mean that the pagan Rome did not bear rule over all the earth? By which, in reality, Rome is a universal empire. But why is it the Shepherd's Rod says in 2SR 140? Let us go back again, brothers and sisters. It says, 139. The brass kingdom is accepted to represent Grecia, but the fact is that Grecia never did bear rule over all the earth. The most distant point of the compass reached by Alexander the Great was a portion of India. Neither did imperial Rome bear rule over all the earth. Even imperial Rome did not bear rule over all the earth. Brothers and sisters, now let us analyze closely. Daniel 2 verse 39. The Bible is very plain. It did not say that the kingdom represented by gold be rule over all the earth. Now let us read Daniel 2 verse 39 in 2SR 139. It says, these are facts which cannot be denied. So these facts can never be denied. However, there is another proof that bears evidence of the same. Said the prophet, and after thee, king of Babylon, shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. Daniel 2 verse 39. 2SR page 139. Now, it is illogical that God would tell King Nebuchadnezzar through the channel of Daniel to tell King Nebuchadnezzar that it is the brass kingdom that shall be rule over all the earth. If the gold kingdom be rule over all the earth, if the silver kingdom be rule all over the earth, and if the iron kingdom be rule all over the earth, it is illogical. The mere fact that it is only the brass kingdom that had been stated in the Bible that be rule all over the earth plainly is telling us that the gold kingdom, the silver, brothers and sisters, never bear rule over all the earth. Now the Shepherd's Rod is plainly telling in 2SR 139 and 140 the pointing to the Grecian Empire. If that is what Daniel 2 verse 39 is saying, that it is the Grecian Empire, then the Bible is at fault because the Grecian Empire is already in the past. But it never be ruled all over the earth. And then the Shepherd's Rod is explaining that if Daniel is at fault, the responsibility will fall upon God because God is the overseer of the truth that had been bestowed to Daniel. So it is God's duty to correct Daniel. But since God did not correct Daniel, it must stand as it is, that the brass kingdom shall bear rule over all the earth. And then the Shepherd's Rod is plainly telling that the brass kingdom mentioned there is pointing to the third division of the exceeding great horn. Because in the book of Daniel, only the exceeding great horn that bear rule over all the earth. Now, since it was disqualified on the first period of the exceeding great horn, it says in 2SR 140, imperial Rome did not bear rule over all the earth. Now, how about the second stage, the papacy, brothers and sisters? Did the papacy bear rule all over the earth? Now, I would like to read first here in 2SR page 123. Let's read. It says, thus the symbol of the woman sitting on the waters represents the period before the Reformation. This was true during the period of papal supremacy, for at that time the papacy ruled the Roman world, peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Thus the woman sat on the waters during the 1260 prophetic years of Daniel 7 verse 25. But she is yet to sit on the heads and on the beast. Had she sat on the nondescript beast instead of on the waters, it would have been wrongly symbolized, for the woman, by the tool of Catholicism, did not reign over all the world beasts, but over many peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues and many waters. Now here's another statement in the old symbolic code. Let's read. 3 symbolic code, number 7, page 4, it says, "And as papal Rome never ruled over or sat upon all the kings of the world." So the symbolism, it says, brothers and sisters, defiantly shows that the kings are not synonymous with the heads. So it says here, 3 symbolic code, number 7, page 4, that papacy had not been able to be ruled over all the earth. Now, the voice of inspiration is now plainly telling us, brothers and sisters, that the predicted event, Revelation 13, verse 3 and 4, or Revelation 13 verse 3, that all the world wandered after the beast, that is the predicted time of the exceeding great horn, that the exceeding great horn shall bear rule over all the earth. And it is during the brass kingdom, meaning it is in the third period of the exceeding great horn, which is the Protestant period, brothers and sisters. What is the focal point of the exceeding great horn? It is concerning the daily and the sanctuary. So the statement, "be rule over all the earth," and also the statement, "all the world wandered after the beast." Brothers and sisters, the beast is a system. According to SR page 86, the 10 horns of the beast represent universal system. The nondescript beast has 10 horns, the leopard-like beast has 10 horns, and the scarlet-colored beast has 10 horns. Now, the statement says, "and all the world wandered after the beast." What world that wandered after the beast? Whoever that world is, all of them. Because the word all, meaning without any exemption. You cannot use the word all if there is still within that world by which Satan had not been able to lead them to wander after the beast, so that the knowledge of Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary had been set aside, no longer regarded as vital interest to the church. And not only that, trodden underfoot, they have no knowledge concerning about it, brothers and sisters. So there must be a world in fulfillment of Revelation 13 verse 3. Whoever that world, meaning all within that world, not even one among them has a knowledge concerning Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. Why is it that it cannot be applied in the period of pagan Rome? Now, during the period of pagan Rome, although it is a universal beast because it has 10 horns, but the focal point of the exceeding great horn, we need to connect our subject to the exceeding great horn, as stated in Daniel 2 verse 39. Let us read again the statement. In tract number 3 on page 39. "And as the great horn of the he-goat is symbolical of the Roman world, represented by iron in Daniel 2 verse 40, in its 3 periods, pagan, ecclesiastical, and Protestant." Now, there are 3 periods of the exceeding great horn, brothers and sisters: pagan, ecclesiastical, and Protestant period. Now, why is it that the Bible says that it is during the brass kingdom that the exceeding great horn bears rule over all the earth? There must be an accurate significance of that statement, brothers and sisters. Let us read again the statement in 2SR page 139. "These are facts which cannot be denied. However, there is another proof that bears evidence of the same." What facts that cannot be denied? That the horn bears rule over all the earth. That is the statement here in 2SR 139. It says, "The horn bears rule over all the earth." But when? When does the horn bears rule over all the earth? What horn? The exceeding great horn. The answer is found in Daniel 2 verse 39. "However, there is another proof that bears evidence of the same. Say the prophet, after thee, king of Babylon, shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth." Daniel 2 verse 39. You cannot twist the meaning of the symbols, brothers and sisters. When does the exceeding great horn shall be rule over all the earth? In the period of the brass kingdom. Does the brass kingdom mentioned there is pointing to the Grecian Empire? No. It is only a clue. As stated in track number 2, page 13, that brass is in a numerical value of number 3. And since the exceeding great horn is divided into 3 divisions, pagan, papal, and Protestant period, therefore it is predicted beforehand that the exceeding great horn did not be ruled over all the earth in the pagan period, did not be ruled over all the earth in the papal supremacy, but the exceeding great horn shall be ruled all over the earth in the Protestant period. The Protestant period begins after the Dark Ages, according to 2TG 22, page 22. Brothers and sisters, that is during the religious freedom represented by the white theme, 2TG 22, page 22. Now, what does it mean by bears rule over all the earth? Pointing to the daily and the sanctuary, because that is the focal point in Daniel 8, verse 11 and verse 12. And it is closely connected to Revelation 13, verse 3. All the world wandered after the beast, meaning whatever that world is represented, the exceeding great horn bears rule all of them. That they had been, the devil had been able to lead them to wander that system, by which the focal point of following that system is to set aside Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, trodden underfoot. It seems out of value, no longer regarded by them as very important of the plan of salvation. Now, let me ask you a question. Is Daniel 2 verse 39 symbolical or literal? If you will say symbolical, then the earth mentioned here could not be literal earth. It points out to the symbolical earth. Bears rule all over the earth. What earth? Symbolical earth. I would like to go back again, brothers and sisters, to the first period of the exceeding great horn, pagan Rome. Revelation 13 verse 3 cannot be applied in that period of time. Because what world by which you can say that all of them within that world, not even one of them, has knowledge concerning the sanctuary doctrine? What is the world during the Old Testament period? Palestine. It points out to Palestine. In the entire period of pagan Rome, more particularly from the ascendancy of Rome, had he been able to darken all the understanding of the people within that dominion in Palestine, that the entire Palestine, there is no even one group of people or even one man that has knowledge of the sanctuary doctrine? No, the apostles were there. He had been able to hiden the truth concerning the sanctuary doctrine in the heavenly sanctuary, at least majority in the Jewish nation, which is a part of the Palestine, majority of them, but it cannot be applied the word all, because there are still God's people, the apostolic church, they have a complete knowledge concerning the sanctuary doctrine according to 2SR 268. It cannot be applied in the first period. That is why B.T. Hotep says in 2SR 140, the imperial Rome did not be ruled all over the earth as far as the daily and the sanctuary is thus concerned, although it is a universal empire. In the second period of the ecclesiastical Rome, did the papacy been able to reign all over the world in that period of time? No. The shepherds are very plain in 2SR 123. The mere fact that the Bible in Revelation 17:15, God revealed to John that the woman sit only on many waters because she had not been able to be ruled all over the earth in the period of the papacy. And secondly, if the exceeding great horn be ruled all over the earth in the period of the papacy, then the Bible is wrong. Because it is definite. It is in the third period of the exceeding great horn by which the exceeding great horn had been able to trodden underfoot all the world. In the book of Daniel, it says, be ruled all over the earth. It is symbolical earth. Therefore, it was predicted beforehand that in the Protestant period, brothers and sisters, perfectly corroborating to Isaiah 59:16, there was no man. Ezekiel 22 verse 30. Isaiah 63 verse 5. And corroborating to our study concerning, brothers and sisters, the perfect fulfillment of Revelation 14 verse 8. If you still remember, brothers and sisters, Brethren, you cannot deny the scriptures. You can evade, but only for your damnation. It was predicted beforehand, brothers and sisters, that all the world, what world? The symbolical earth. The Bible is very plain. Is in the period of the brass kingdom, the third period, brothers and sisters, where the brass kingdom shall be rule all over. It is the earth. The earth here could not be literal. It must be symbolical earth, brothers and sisters. And there is no other symbolical earth except the two-horned beast, the United States of America. The mere fact that, brothers and sisters, that the obedient has no knowledge when the judgment for the living begins is the strongest proof that the devil had been able to successfully to hide the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary in the whole symbolical earth. How could you apply the statement, all the world wandered after the beast? What world? Tell me. Revelation 13 verse 3. It says all the world. Now what world? There are only two worlds as far as the symbolization of the beast is thus concerned. The sea and the earth. The sea is the old world, but the old world is divided into two divisions, brothers and sisters, right? The first division represented by the sea is Palestine, and the second division represented by the sea is the continent of Europe. Now let me read to you in tract number 5 on page, let's read the statement given by the shepherd's rod, page 45. And the mountain was afire, it was cast into the sea. The sea, the storehouse of the waters, represents the original abode of peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Revelation 17 verse 15. Hence, while it stands for the world as a whole, the place wherein the nations' waters reside, it definitely localizes the place wherein the church mountain appears. This is borne out by the prophet's words, sing unto the Lord a new song, and his praise from the end of the earth, yet that go down into the sea, where the world originated, Palestine, and all that is therein. Isaiah 42 verse 10. So the first section of the old world represented by the sea, brothers and sisters, is Palestine. And the second section represented by the sea is the continent of Europe, according to the Great Controversy, 440. Now let's read the Great Controversy, page 440. So it says here, brothers and sisters, it could not then arise among the crowded and struggling nationalities of the old world. So it says, the old world mentioned here, we know, the turbulent sea of peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. It must be sought in the Western continent. So the Western continent is pointing to the United States of America, symbolized by the earth. But the old world, brothers and sisters, we know that that is pointing to the continent of Europe. And that is the place by which the papacy reigns during the Dark Ages. But the fact is, even during the Dark Ages of religion, brothers and sisters, at that time, the exceeding great horn had not been able to be ruled all over the earth because there is a woman in Europe at that time. By which the woman, brothers and sisters, in that period of time, they have knowledge concerning the daily and the sanctuary. So it says here in 2 SR 142, I would like to read. So while the truth was cast down by the church leadership in that period, and the abomination set up, God had some in obscurity who keep his Sabbath and had knowledge of the sanctuary truth through the entire 1,260 years of wilderness journey. Thus she was nourished, feed, revealing that she was to return. 2 SR 142. So the shepherd's rod says that during the dark ages of religion in that continent of Europe, there are some that had been hidden by God miraculously, and to them was bestowed the knowledge, brothers and sisters, concerning the daily and the sanctuary. So it cannot be applied that all the world wandered to that system. It cannot be applied during pagan Rome, because the world during pagan Rome is represented by the sea, which is Palestine. Majority of them wandered into that system by which the knowledge of Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary, they had no knowledge, and pointing to the Jewish nation. But the fact is, you cannot apply the word all, because the apostles, the apostolic church were still there, and they have complete knowledge concerning the daily and the sanctuary. 2 SR 268. And you cannot use the word all. But the Bible cannot be mistaken. In Revelation 13 verse 3, Remember, it is not me that connect the exceeding great horn to Revelation 13 verse 3. It is consecrated way to Christian perfection, 104. That Revelation 13 verse 3, the statement, all the world wandered after the beast, meaning there must be a world that world, not even one among them, that the devil had not been able to successfully hide the truth expressed by the daily and the sanctuary, more pertaining to Christ's mediation in the heavenly sanctuary, that not even one among them have knowledge. Otherwise, the Bible had been a mistake, saying all the world, while in reality, there is still one. During the Dark Ages, we already read 2SR 142, and it is already stated in 2SR 123, in 3 Symbolic Code number 7, page 4, that the exceeding great horn during the papal supremacy did not bear rule over all the earth. Why? Because in the continent of Europe, according to 2SR 142, even though that majority are already wandering after that system, brothers and sisters, but the fact is, you cannot use the term all the world because there are still God's people that God bestowed unto them the knowledge concerning the daily and the sanctuary, and they were observing it and they were keeping. Therefore, you cannot use the word all the world. The revelation is not a prophecy of itself. 2SR page 221. Revelation 13 verse 3, saying all the world wandered after the beast, according to Alonzo Jones, is pointing to the prediction of the exceeding great horn, that the exceeding great horn shall be ruled all over the earth. But what period? Represented by the brass, the third period, and that is the Protestant period. And the Bible made it so plain, the exceeding great horn bear rules all over the earth. That is symbolical earth, brothers and sisters. And the Bible cannot be mistaken, brothers and sisters. So what does it mean? Unto whom that God will bestow the knowledge of the two divine laws, moral and ceremonial, to the woman. Going back again to 2SR page 261, to John, the Revelator was shown the true spiritual church of God in all ages through the symbolization of a woman. And then Betty Hotep described the woman in 2SR page 268. Let us read. It says, thus the woman represents a church that keep the commandments of God, the moral law, and have the testimony of Jesus Christ, the ceremonial law, or the plan of salvation revealed in the light of the spirit of prophecy. In what way the plan of salvation is revealed? 2SR 187, through the sanctuary construction and service, the plan of salvation is revealed. So here it says, 2SR 268, that woman must be the church by which God bestowed unto him. And the quotation here in 2SR 268 is Revelation 12:17. The last generation of men. Early Writings 143. It says, Revelation 12:17, that must be the church in the last generation. And what is the description in Spiritual Gifts, Book 3, page 26? That church in the last generation, they keep the commandments of God all and acknowledge the gift of prophecy among them. And B.T. Hotep says that the woman in the New Testament division is divided into 3 divisions. Let us read again, 2SR page 76. It says, John's vision in the 12th chapter of Revelation deals with 2 main subjects, namely the woman clothed with the sun and the red dragon. The latter has been explained, see pages 65 to 69. The symbol of the woman in the New Testament time covers 3 divisions. First, the apostolic period. Second, her absence from civilization in the wilderness for 1,260 days or years of papal persecution, verses 6 and 14. Third, the last period of the church while in conflict with the dragon. The last period of the church while in conflict with the dragon. Where is the conflict of the woman? 12 Symbolic Code number 6 and 7, page 7. It says here, let us read. Her warfare was to be in the wilderness. So the warfare of the woman must be in the wilderness. Now, the woman must be in the wilderness. The last section of the woman must be in the wilderness. The Shepherd's Rod says that that woman is clothed with the sun. And in 2SR page 75, I would like to read, brothers and sisters, it says here, therefore the woman clothed with the sun and travailing with child is the period after Israel went out of Egypt. Where is the woman which is clothed with the sun? After she went out of Egypt. And there are two that went out of Egypt, the typical and antitypical. The typical woman and the antitypical woman. Who are they? That is represented by the last generation of men, brothers and sisters. And the shepherd's rod made it so plain that if the woman is in the wilderness, then there is no church of God in the vineyard. I would like to read 2SR page 228. Therefore, while she was in the wilderness, there could have been no church in the vineyard. 2SR 228, I would like to read again. Therefore, while she was in the wilderness, there could have been no church in the vineyard. What is the vineyard? Tract number 12, page 43. It says here, to begin with, we see from this scripture that the woman left her vineyard homeland, Palestine. What is vineyard? Palestine. But we are talking about the woman, brothers and sisters, in the modern Palestine. Now, let us read what is the modern Palestine. Here in 1SR 157 and 158. Quoting Exodus 15, verse 14, 15, and 16. Thy people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed. The mighty men of Moab, trembling, shall take hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm, they shall be as still as a stone. Till thy people pass over, O Lord. Till the people pass over, which thou hast purchased. The land of Canaan represents the land into which the church at this present time came into existence, namely the United States of America. The name Palestina means lands of strangers. The United States is composed of strangers, people from many nations and races. Dukes of Edom refers to the same class of those mentioned in Isaiah 63, as previously explained. The name Moab means progeny, as forefathers. 1SR 157 and 158. So, brothers and sisters, to repeat again, Palestine is the vineyard, brothers and sisters. And that is why we have the type, which is the old world, and the antitype, which is the new world. In the type, brothers and sisters, the woman in the vineyard and the woman in the wilderness. The same in the antitype, the woman in the vineyard and the woman in the wilderness. That is why if you will read Zechariah chapter 6, verse 1 to 8, if you will look onto the chart, you can see the church to and back from the wilderness. You can see that if you have that chart, brothers and sisters, in Zechariah chapter 6. The church to the wilderness and then back from the wilderness. Brothers and sisters, that is very plain, points out to the Christian era. Now, I would like to read to you this reading in the Old Symbolic Code. Let's go back again. It says here in 2 Symbolic Code, number 10, page 4. It says, consequently, the church from 1844 to the close of provision is divided into two sections, the church before the loud cry and the church in the time of the loud cry, the latter of which will, by comparison, be far superior to the former in spirituality. In fact, there is no comparison between the two. Hence, those who cannot tell in which one of these stages the church now is must be in great darkness. Or in other words, it points out the woman before the loud cry and the woman in the time of the loud cry. The woman before the loud cry, that is the woman in the vineyard. The statement in 2SR 228 saying, if the woman is in the wilderness, there could be no church of God in the vineyard. That statement is also reciprocally, we can also declare that if the woman is in the vineyard, there can be no church in the wilderness. Brothers and sisters, that would be very plain. Now, what is the church before the loud cry? The woman. That is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And that is the 9th hour call. Brothers and sisters. Now let us read tract number 8. Tract number 8, page 47 and page 48. It says, why David a type? Inevitably because he is the only one who perfectly fits the antitype, the leadership in the time of the loud cry of the third angel's message. This being so, then it necessarily follows that Saul, the first king who reigned over Israel and who was largely responsible for the early experience of David's life, is a type of the church leadership in the period preceding the loud cry, the leadership which was raised up in 1844. That is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, right? The leadership that had been raised up in 1844, that is antitypical soul. What is the leadership in the time of the loud cry of the third angel's message? That is the eighth church, represented by David. The eighth church in the New Testament succession. Now, I would like to invite all the Bidian to study closely, to repeat again. Who are they, the seven antitypical brothers of David? Because that is God's law of type, according to tract number 9, page 72. God's law of type, that if there is type, there must be an antitype. Now, who are they? The seven antitypical brothers of David. The mere fact that the Seventh-day Adventist Church is represented by Saul, therefore it cannot be represented by the brother of David, because Saul is not a brother of David. And to repeat again and again, brothers and sisters, the seven candlesticks in Revelation 2 and 3, according to tract number 2, page 31, there is antitypical churches. So let us distinctly separate the seven typical churches. It says, tract number 2, page 31, all seven of these antitypical churches. So there must be seven antitypical churches. There must be also seven typical churches. But the seven typical churches, the last one is Seventh-day Adventist, which is typifying by King Saul. So the seven typical churches cannot be the brothers of David. Because the last one, the youngest, which is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, is represented by King Saul. So it cannot be applied to the antitypical brothers of David. And for sure, brothers and sisters, if the eighth church in the New Testament succession in Answerer number 1, page 68, saying that the 11th hour is pointing to the Davidian, so the eighth church in the New Testament succession must be Davidian, therefore the brothers of David must also be Davidian. And that is why there are two Laodicean, the typical and the antitypical Laodicea. And that is the answer in 2TG number 22, page 22. Now let us read again. God's Spirit having been silenced in the North Country must denote that the messages of God in the North Country were generally rejected, especially the one of the fourth chariot, which caused the Spirit of truth to turn away and to bring truth no more through them, to be silent there, and that therefore there is not to be expected any truth through them. Brothers and sisters, it is high time now that you will read this paragraph over and over and over again. It did not say, especially the one of the four chariots. No, that is not the statement. The statement declared, especially the one of the fourth chariot. One of the fourth chariot. And to repeat again, grammatically, the statement one of denotes at least two objects. You cannot use the word one of if it is only one. Since the fourth chariot in tract number 2, page 34, it says the Laodicean church, the fourth chariot is the Laodicean church, and the statement is one of the fourth, meaning one of the Laodiceans, indicating that the Laodiceans, meaning people declaring judgment. And there are two groups of people declaring judgment. The typical, declaring the judgment that pertains to the dead. The antitypical, declaring the judgment that pertains to the living. Brothers and sisters, as I've said, it is not really big deal. Who among them? Is it the typical Laodiceans or is it the antitypical Laodiceans that causes God's Spirit to bring truth no more in the United States of America? The focal point is the predicted event by which God declared, do not expect any message in the North Country. What is the North Country? Babylon. There are two Babylons in 2SR 245. Now let us read again. Old symbolic code. 2 symbolic code number 1, page 8. As the fulfillment of this prophecy is yet future, and that future fulfilled in our days. As the fulfillment of this prophecy is yet future, we cannot now tell who will then be the head, king of the north of this prophetic nation, modern Babylon, that is symbolized by the two-horned beast. Now tell me, who is the two-horned beast? United States of America. The shepherd's rod made it so plain. That is modern Babylon. And that is why Revelation 14 verse 8 is applied into two divisions. According to 2SR 245. Now let us read 2SR page 245. This is the statement. Thus the second angel's message of Revelation 14 verse 8 was proclaimed immediately after the disappointment, saying, Babylon is fallen, is fallen.
that is the world in 1844, fell in the same manner as the one before the flood. What is the world before the flood? Antediluvian world. There was no nation at that time, only church. And that is why the one that had been fallen in 1844 is more directly applied to the churches. And it says, the present world is called Babylon because the kingdom of Babylon is the immediate one after the flood. So who is the second Babylon after the flood? We already read to symbolic code number 1, page 8. That is the two-horned beast. The Babylon before the flood is the old world, the continent of Europe. That is the Babylon before the flood, the antitypical antediluvian world, Babylon. But the second Babylon, which is the antitypical modern Babylon, the Babylon after the flood, that is the two-horned beast. And that is why in the Great Controversy 390, I would like to read again, the Great Controversy 390, it says here, brothers and sisters, the second angel's message of Revelation 14 was first preached in the summer of 1844, and it then had a more direct application to the churches of the United States. So the application in 1844, the proclamation of the second angel's message, that is only indirectly because it points out to the churches in Europe. But the voice of inspiration says, Revelation 14:8, the direct application is the churches in the United States of America. And this is the fulfillment of Revelation 13, verse 3. All the world, what world? The symbolical earth, wandered after the beast. Now let us study closely. What beast? Beast represents system. What system? By which the entire United States of America, not even one among them that had not been able to follow that system. For example, brothers and sisters, the prophecy in Isaiah 59:16, we should not follow the footstep of the Jewish people. What they did, brothers and sisters, in reality, even though the messages that had been proclaimed unto them, it seems it is against them. It seems, I would like to say it seems. Because if they only accepted the message sent by God through the prophets and repented of their sins and mistakes, they will be accepted by God. So the message, that is called the message for repentance, no, it is not against them. It is to bring them to realization, brothers and sisters, to give them chance to repent. But what they did, that's why here in track number 5, I would like to read in track number 5. The statement here in track number 5 on page 55, it says, what a momentous truth today for a sectarian Christendom. Let it admonish all who choose to walk in the light to avoid the mistakes of others. Oh, how terrible the thought of closing the heart and thereby turning a deaf ear to the pleadings of the Spirit of God. Think what great sorrow and suffering could have been averted had men not been so hardened in pride and self-conceit. It was too humiliating for those leaders in Israel of old to acknowledge their mistakes and receive corrections from God, from God's humble servants, the prophets. But their ignoring the truth did not perpetuate their exaltation in the eyes of the people as they had expected it to. Neither did their killing the prophets make right their error or cover their sins, nor did it silence God, but rather in course of time exposed their utter ignorance and uncovered their shame before the whole world. Should be God's people at this time repeated the mistake of the Jews, or repeat the mistake of the Jews, then the punishment decreed in the words, there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Matthew 24 verse 51 would fail to find in intensity its parallel in any age. A full realization, moreover, simply of the disappointment of being on the better verge of stepping into paradise, but falling short and finding oneself instead plunged in hell. Track number 5, page 55 and page 56. Brethren, do not evade this absolute fact. It is God who declared it. To repeat again, brothers and sisters, why is it that in early writings 249, the prophet is emphasizing that unless you will understand and accept the proclamation of the first and second angel's message, you will not be benefited for the midnight cry proclamation. The glory and the power attended with that message Why? Would you think it can be applied in the days of William Miller? Now, let us analyze closely. I would like to read again that statement in Early Writings 249. It says, "Those who rejected and opposed the light of the first message lost the light of the second and could not be benefited by the power and glory which attended the message. Behold, the bridegroom cometh." Early Writings, page 249. Unless you will accept the first and the second angel's message, you will not be benefited for the proclamation of the midnight cry that attended glory and power with that message. It cannot be applied to the Millerites movement because it is contrary to the proper application of the parable according to 2SR 181 and 182. Because in the experience of William Miller, the midnight cry proclaimed prior to 1844. To SR 181, it says the midnight cry was first proclaimed prior to 1844. But the second angel's message was announced immediately after the disappointment, according to 2SR 245, 1SR 217. But the arrangement given in Early Writings 249, it must be the first angel's message and the second angel's message. And those who rejected the proclamation of the first and second angel's message will never be benefited by the glory and power that attend the proclamation of the message. Behold, the bridegroom cometh. The midnight cry proclamation. Why, brothers and sisters? Because Revelation 14:8 is an announcement. God is telling all the people, more particularly to shepherds and believers, that the message of the midnight cry will never originate in the United States of America. Because Revelation 14 verse 8 is a proclamation to announce that God's Spirit had been quieted in the North Country, which is symbolized by modern Babylon, the two-horned beast. That is very plain, brothers and sisters. And that is why B.T. Hotep says in tract number 11, it says here on page 12, all present truth believers should now see the necessity of shunning every wind of doctrine, regardless how plausible or reasonable it might appear to be. Remember the words, behold, those that go toward the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. Or the shepherd's rod is plainly telling, how could it be that it is God who declared that my spirit have been quieted in the north country, and you still expect any message from the north country? Regardless how reasonable it might be, it seems very reasonable. It seems very plausible. But still, God declared, do not expect any truth that will originate in the United States of America. Logically, brothers and sisters, the statement in 2TG number 22, page 22, God's Spirit having been silenced in the North Country must denote that the messages of God, what messages? The messages of the first and second angel's message. Because that is the messages that had been proclaimed by William Miller in the primary application. Brothers and sisters, right? In tract number 2. Let us read tract number 2. Here in tract number 2, on page 29 and page 30, the concluding revelation is, behold, these that go toward the north country have quieted my spirit in the north country. Zechariah 6 verse 8. After the warning message by the Millerite movement had been rejected by the churches in fulfillment of the words, have quieted my spirit in the north country, God withdrew His Spirit from them. In evidence of this, the second angel announced, Babylon is fallen. Revelation 14:8. So the evidence is the proclamation of the second angel's message. God withdrew His Spirit. That's what it means. That God's Spirit have been silenced in the north country, meaning God's Spirit have been withdrawn, indicating that prior to 1844, God's Spirit had been deposited into the north country, which is the old world, the continent of Europe. That is where those churches, the four great denominations, had been raised: Lutherans, Presbyterian, Methodists, and Baptists. But in 1844, the announcement, according to 2SR page 97, that God would no longer let any light shine from these churches. 2SR page 97. The second angel's message, the significance that God will no longer let light shine in these churches. And in 2SR 288, it says the proclamation of the second angel's message is to let us know that God will no longer reveal Himself through that channel. So in that statement, we can easily understand that it perfectly typifies the antediluvian world as stated in 2SR 245, because the proclamation is only to the churches, because during the antediluvian world, there was no nation. But the Babylon after the flood, the focal point is the nations, the entire nations. And that is the two horned beast, modern Babylon, to symbolic code number 1, page 8. And also very plain in this reading in 2TG 22:22, because the focal point is the fourth chariot, and the fourth chariot is the Laodicean, track number 2, page 34, and Laodicean, people declaring judgment, answerer number 1, page 11. Both of them, the people declaring the judgment that pertains to the dead and the people declaring the judgment that pertains to the living, originated in the United States of America. So the statement very plain, do not expect any truth through them. What does the pronoun them pointing? To the fourth chariot, which is the Laodiceans. Let us read again. It says, God's Spirit, having been silenced in the North Country, must denote that the messages of God in the North Country were generally rejected, especially the one of the fourth chariot. So the application of the primary application, it is not the special one. It is not the particular object in view. Because the word especially, meaning, brothers and sisters, there must be an application by which it is not the special one. So the black horses is not the special one. The focal point is the fourth chariot. It says, especially the one of the fourth chariot, which caused the Spirit of truth to turn away and to bring truth no more through them, to be silent there, and that therefore there is not to be expected any truth through them. Who said it? God. Do not expect any truth that will originate in the two-horned beast domain in the United States of America. And since the only truth that remains, which is not revealed to B.T. Hotep, is the present truth under the seventh seal, then it's easy to understand that the present truth under the seventh seal will never originate in the United States of America. And that present truth, brothers and sisters, the strongest proof and signs that given by God that that present truth under the seventh seal had been bestowed by God into that movement, because they have knowledge when the judgment for the dead will close and the judgment for the living begins. And unless we have that knowledge, we have no present truth. I would like to read 2SR page 164. It says here, 2SR page 164, it says, But when our high priest shall begin the atonement for the living, there must be a message of present truth, sounding of the trumpet, urging everyone to lay hold on the Lamb of God, which is Jesus Christ, by which only can he in figure come to the sanctuary, confess his sin, and secure his life. Then for sure the present truth mentioned here must be the present truth under the judgment of the living, because it points out to the time when the high priest shall begin the atonement for the living. And it says there must be a message of present truth. And we know that the only seal that pertains to the living is the seventh seal. 2SR 202. And it says in 1SR page 28, the saints of God in all ages are sealed with present truth. And whatever that present truth is, that is the seal. Therefore, before Jesus Christ will begin the atonement that intended to the living saints, the saints that will no longer to taste death, he will send first present truth under the seventh seal. Because in 11 symbolic code, number 3, page 5, it says present truth comes only from God. And it is God who will appoint the seasons by which the present truth to be revealed. And only God knows when the judgment for the living will begin. So before God will begin the atonement for the living, he must send present truth first. And the voice of inspiration says here in 2SR 164, unless, the word unless is the same with the word except. Unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to us, we would have no present truth while the judgment for the living is in session. Now ponder deeply. Do you have any knowledge when the judgment for the dead will close and the judgment for the living begins? Then if you have no knowledge, then you have no present truth. Unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to you, you have no present truth. That is very plain here in 2SR 164. And if we will apply it unto us, if we are saying that the present truth under the seventh seal is deposited unto us then, but in reality we have no knowledge when the judgment for the dead will close and the commencement for the living, then such claim is spurious, fictitious, unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to us, we would have no present truth. Brothers and sisters, how could our Almighty Father, according to Adventist Activities in page 14 and 15, it says here, has the Lord no fresh truth, no meat in due season, to meet the needs of His people at this particular time? Has He forsaken the earth? And how will He judge the living without a message declaring that their cases are now to appear before God? But the Shepherd's Rod made it so plain in 2TG number 12, page 29. It says here, very plain, the revelation moreover in the following verses again and again endeavors to make us see that the event there portrayed is the judgment in session, where God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. And I saw thrones, John declares, and judgment was given unto them. Revelation 20 verse 4. John truly penned it as a prophecy, but when it actually takes place, then God's agency on earth, the spirit of prophecy in the church, is to proclaim that the event has actually taken place. Who will proclaim it? That the judgment for the living is already in progress. It is the spirit of prophecy in the church. That is the gift of inspiration. And then it says here in page 15, and how will we know when it comes if we keep our eyes and ears closed? If we do not change our present state of mind, how shall we believe even if we should accidentally hear that the message is come? And then it says, would the judge of heaven condemn one without trial? And how shall he judge him without summons? No, it cannot be. Because our God is all justice God. Here in tract number 9, page 34, it says, if an earthly judge does not convict and condemn a criminal without benefit of trial by jury, certainly then the all just God of heaven will not. Tract number 9, page 34. And that is why here, there must be heavenly summons. The heavenly summons is to proclaim that the judgment for the living is in progress. Here in 2SR page 164, it says, he who fails to respond to the heavenly summons will be left without the seal or covering of God, and therefore must be cut off from among His people as prefigured by the services in the typical Day of Atonement. And here in 2SR page 219, it says here, while the judgment for the living is in progress, every sin must be confessed and put away. He who neglects this great privilege will find himself involved in everlasting ruin, cut off from among his people. Ignoring this most vital subject will not profit us in the least. 2SR 219, this is a very vital subject, and if you will ignore this subject, you will not be profited, brothers and sisters. Now, to repeat again, the reason that in early writings 249 is for prophecy declared clearly that if you have no knowledge concerning the first and the second angel's message, what is the first angel's message? Fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment is come. That is directly applied to the living. And who will proclaim it? It says in 2TG 12:29, John penned it as a prophecy. But when it actually takes place, God's agency on earth will be the one to proclaim that the event has actually taken place. 2TG number 12, page 29. But that knowledge will be bestowed by God. It says, the spirit of prophecy in the church, 2TG 12:29. It can be easily discerned, brothers and sisters, that according to 2TG 34, very plain, brothers and sisters, that while you may choose to keep God's commandment, you cannot voluntarily offer yourself to have the spirit of prophecy. It says here in 2TG 34:23, and while you may choose to keep the Sabbath commandment, so that is pointing to the daily, you cannot inspire yourself with the spirit of prophecy. This gift is bestowed upon the remnant by God Himself. 2TG 34:23. But there are many self-appointed servants saying that they were Elijah, they were David, with many others, brothers and sisters. But the time will come that such claim only bring damnation to your own self, brothers and sisters. Because the last manifestation of inspiration is to announce the commencement of the judgment for the living. so that they could be able to prepare themselves to appear before God. And unless that knowledge is bestowed to any of you, brothers and sisters, you are only fooling your own self. Now let us go back again, brothers and sisters, here in 1SR page 150. Tell me, Isaiah 59 verse 16, when this prophetic verse find its perfect fulfillment. Let us read First Testimonies, Volume 1, 355. Sister White says, I was pointed. Let us read the declaration of the prophet. Let us read Testimonies for the Church, Volume 1, 355. It says, I was pointed to Isaiah 58, then Isaiah 59, verse 1 to 15, Jeremiah 14, verse 10 to 12, as a description of the present state of our nation. So the nation mentioned there, our nation, that is United States of America. Would you deny the testimony of the prophet? And it says, the people of this nation have forsaken and forgotten God, their own corrupt ways, until God has turned from them. The word until meaning up to the time when God turned away from them. What? United States of America. And the reason that Sister White did not include verse 16, only Isaiah 59, verse 1 to 15, because that is the time by which Sister White says, up to the time, until God has turned from them. The word until, in tract number 3, page 66, it says, the word until meaning up to. So there is an appointed time that God turned away from them. And that is the fulfillment in 2TG number 22, page 22. My spirit have been silent and do not expect any truth that will originate from that country, North country, modern Babylon, the two-horned beast, regardless how plausible and it might reasonable appear it might be. It cannot be of God. Brothers and sisters, read the Bible, Isaiah 59:16. Now tell me, brothers and sisters, the fulfillment of this verse, 1SR 150. Isaiah 59 verse 16, it says, verse 16, first part, and he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. God was astonished. Moses and Aaron stood between the dead and the living. Number 16, verse 48. God used Elijah on Mount Carmel. 1 Kings chapter 18. In the crisis are brought to view, God finds no man. Ezekiel 22, verse 30. So he himself interposes. God finds no man. Are we saying that no more human being? No. No inspired human being. Pointing to the United States of America, because Sister White says Isaiah 59 is applied to the United States of America. How about Isaiah 58? Because Isaiah 58 is included in that testimony, in Testimonies Volume 1, 355. Reading the Great Controversy, 453. This is the description in the Great Controversy, page 453. It says here, again the command is given, cry aloud, spare not, lift up thy voice like a trumpet, and show my people their transgression, and the house of Jacob their sins. Who is the focal point? The house of Jacob. It is not the wicked world, but those whom the Lord designates as my people, that are to be reproved for their transgression. He declares further, yet they seek me daily, and delight to know my ways, as a nation, pointing to a nation, as a nation that did righteousness, and forsook not the ordinance of their God. Isaiah 58 verse 1 and 2. Here is brought to view a class who think themselves righteous and appear to manifest great interest in the service of God, but the stern and solemn rebuke of the searcher of hearts proves them to be trampling upon the divine precepts. Well, who said it? The searcher of all hearts, that is God. God will never tell a lie. That Isaiah 58 is applied to a nation by which they think that they were showing great interest, manifest great interest in the service of God, but the stern and solemn rebuke cometh from the Almighty God. They were trampling upon the divine precepts. What nation mentioned there? It was already answered in Volume 1, 355. Isaiah 58 is pointing to our nation, United States of America. And B.T. Hotep also stated the fact that the house of Jacob is United States of America. Now let us read 1TG number 5, page 9 and page 10. The house of Jacob, to which God is here speaking, is again identified by the fact that it dwells in a land that is full of silver, of gold, and of chariots, that there is no end to the number of them, since there is no land in all God's world that is as rich commerce with silver, gold, and motor vehicular traffic, as is this land of the United States of America. Very obviously, America, the land where the headquarters of the gospel is the land to which God refers as the house of Jacob. What nation does the house of Jacob? United States of America. Now, look at the Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary concerning, brothers and sisters, Isaiah 59 verse 16. In 4 BC, is the Bible commentary. It says, the situation is hopeless because it is a wholesale deception. In 1 SR 219, the description given by Betty Hodep, great apostasy. Isaiah 59:16, Isaiah 63 verse 5, and Micah 7 verse 5, it is called great apostasy, and we will read that. It says, Bible Commentary, Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, Volume 4, page 311, there was no man. In the crisis that had risen, there was none able to provide relief. See Ezekiel 22 verse 30. There was none to stay the threatened scourge, as did Aaron and Moses. Numbers 16 verse 47 and 48. Or Phinehas, Numbers 25 verse 7 and 8. From a human point of view, the situation appeared hopeless. The situation, brothers and sisters, at this present time, in the United States of America, hopeless. And it says, brothers and sisters, let us read, help must come from God. In the writings of B.T. Hodep, says, God Himself interposes. There must be divine intervention. In 2SR, brothers and sisters, I would like to read to you, the divine intervention is called judgment. It says here in 2SR page 93 and page 94, since the history of the church is such, and the last section, Laodiceans, is in a worse condition. You need to observe the grammar because that is admonished unto us. In 2SR 118, this grammatical rule is followed in the scripture, and it is one way to recognize present truth. And in 1SR 244, it says that it is wonderful to note the inspiration of the scriptures. It is only in the appointed time that it is grammatically correct. Now, the word worse is an adjective. Adjective has 3 degrees of comparison. Positive degree, comparative degree, and superlative degree. Now, the degree used in this paragraph is comparative degree. And comparative degree is used to compare two objects. Now, it comparing, brothers and sisters, the two sections of the Laodiceans. The first section is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the people declaring the judgment that pertains to the dead. And the last section is the antitypical Laodiceans, the Davidian. Brothers and sisters, do not deny the Word of God. I will give you an example with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It is the true witness says that the angel of Laodicea are blind, naked, miserable, wretched. If you will bring that message to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, they will never accept your message and they will say that you are lying. Because according to them, their leadership are theologians, doctor of divinity. Then how dare you that you will say that our ministers are blind? I hear that several times from them, and I told them, no, it is not me who told it. It is the true witness, Jesus Christ. And I'd rather believe Jesus Christ than the testimony among the Seventh-day Adventist circles, because Jesus Christ will never tell a lie. Now, do you believe the shepherd's rod? The shepherd's rod says the last section of the Laodiceans is worse condition. The condition of the first section, which is the Seventh-day Adventist, it is bad because that is the positive degree. And since it is comparative degree, it says worse, then from bad to worse. Brothers and sisters, brethren, the shepherd's rod says in 2 TG number 17, page 8, it is better for all of us to acknowledge our failures than to evade the truth, for it is the truth that shall make us free. Who among us could say that the Davidian is not divided into different groups? In reality, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the condition is bad because they were not divided. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is intact, brothers and sisters. But how about the Davidian? Look at the statement in 2SR page 9, page 10 rather. I would like to read to you. And tell me, this reading, how do you understand this statement? 2SR page 10. As the present day confusion and misunderstanding of the scriptures among Christendom is proven by the multiplicity of sects, it is evident that the churches are in the Laodicean state. Would you think this statement cannot be applied to the Davidian? I could paraphrase the statement by saying, as the present-day confusion and misunderstanding of the shepherd's rod among the Davidian is proven by the multiplicity of sects among the Davidia, it is evident that the Davidian organizations are in the Laodicean state. Wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked, and by denying the church of this plain statement proves the words of the true witness correct, and no is not. The Davidian will deny that. And it is only prove the declaration of Jesus Christ that if such organization were already divided into different groups, although they did not acknowledge that the causes of that division, they misunderstood the writings by which it seems that that is their basis of their doctrines, brothers and sisters. They misunderstood the Shepherd's Rod publications. Because if they did not misunderstood, the Davidian today must be remain intact. Because there is only one Davidian from 1930 to 1955. Why is it that Davidian split to different groups? Because of misunderstanding the Shepherd's Rod publications. And they were in Laodicean state. And they did not know. And that is why here in 2SR page 93 and 94, since the history of the church is such, and the last section of the Laodiceans, which is pointing to the people declaring the judgment that pertains to the living, is in a worse condition and under greater condemnation. Sure, we are under greater condemnation than the typical Laodiceans because we have more knowledge than the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the greater knowledge that we have, the condemnation is more greater. And it says, and under greater condemnation than any previous one, and as there is no time left for calling out a new movement, then a message of amazing light and stern rebuke through the Word of God with manifestation of divine judgment is the only remedy that can bring true conversions and reformation. Do not wait God's judgments. If you are faithful and honest, brothers and sisters, you will not wait God's judgment. You will acknowledge the fact, the truth, brothers and sisters. To repeat again, the eighth church in the New Testament succession is the house of David. That is the last representation of the woman. And that woman is in the wilderness. It is not found in the vineyard. The same situation in the time when God rejected Saul, God commanded Samuel the prophet to go to the house of Jesse and find among his sons. God commanded him to anoint. But what happened? The 7 brothers of David are in the vineyard, and David at that time is taking care of the sheep in the wilderness. And brothers and sisters, you cannot explain that matter more clearer than we explain. Because if we will ask you, who are they, the 7 antitypical brothers of David, you will find hard time to answer that question. You might say, the Seventh-day Adventist Church? Then tell me, is King Saul a brother of David? Because the Seventh-day Adventist Church in tract number 8, page 47 and page 48 is antitypical Saul. And not, brothers and sisters, Saul is not a brother of David. Let us project the 7 brothers of David, beginning from Eliab. Do you have record, brothers and sisters, by which the 7th is Elihu, and then the last one is David? Those are the 7 brothers of, and for sure, in this study, to repeat again, brothers and sisters, it's easy to understand. The movement from 1930 to 1955 stand as antitypical Jesse. Antitypical Jesse, the father of David and the father of his 7 brothers. So 7 indicates completeness. Even though that I will no longer enumerate one by one, the truth, the fact stands out boldly that all of them in the two-horned beast domain, in the vineyard, modern Palestine, their time passed one by one, and not even one among them that God had chosen. But it is David, represented by the woman in the wilderness, outside the vineyard, brothers and sisters. And that is the fulfillment of the vision. Great apostasy. I would like to emphasize clearly this great apostasy. Here in 1SR page 219, let's read 1SR page 219 and 220. To the prophet Isaiah, this great apostasy, fostered by blind spiritual guides, was revealed, which he describes in the following scriptures. And he saw that there was no man, and wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore his arm brought salvation unto him, and his righteousness it sustained him. Isaiah 59:16. And I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold. Therefore mine own arm brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. Isaiah 63 verse 5. Micah, looking forward to this wholesale deception, says, trust ye not in a friend, put ye not confidence in a guide. There are two terms used by the shepherd's rod here. One is R 219 and 220. Great apostasy and wholesale deception. Now, here, these three verses is attached into one, joined together. Isaiah 59:16, Isaiah 63:5, Micah 7 verse 5. Let us go first to Isaiah 63 verse 5 in 2TG 44:38. 2TG 44 on page 38. It says here, looking down to this very time, the spur prophecy in Isaiah's days said, Isaiah 63 verse 5, and I looked, and there was none to help, and I wondered that there was none to uphold. Therefore mine own arm brought salvation unto me, and my fury it upheld me. Now remember, Isaiah 63, brothers and sisters, cannot be applied to any other company except to the generation, to the last generation of man. What does it mean by, and I behold, and I look, and there was none to help? The help of the Lord is pointing to inspiration. Now let us read 2TG 24, page 22. If they do awake to their poverty, it will be the greatest miracle since the beginning of the world. I say it will be the greatest because they feel no need of God's help through inspiration. So God's help is channeled through inspiration. Expect none, are prejudiced, suspicious, and fearful of everyone that disagree with their preconceived idea. They are therefore even harder to reach with the saving truth for today than were the Jews of yesterday. And then it says to TG 44:38, here you note that when the time came, what time? There was not even one among his servants. The servants mentioned here are the 7 antitypical brothers of David. Not even one had been found by Samuel. Passed one by one, and not even one among them. Because concerning the Seventh-day Adventist leadership in 2 Symbolic Code number 10, page 6, it was already rejected by God in 1930. But the servants mentioned here, their boundary line is up to the commencement of the judgment for the living. According to 1TG number 45. Let us read here in 1TG number 45 on page 12. It says, the mighty Esau's and the unpretentious Jacob's. We are to study the 66th chapter of Isaiah. In this chapter, the Lord speaks to two groups of servants. The servants up to the cleansing of the sanctuary, Daniel 8:14, up to the judgment for the living, the purification of the church. That servants could not be the Seventh-day Adventist leadership because they were rejected by God in 1930. And 1930, the judgment for the living did not commence. Even in 1934, track number 3, page 43, B.T. Hotep says, the investigative judgment of the living obviously is then yet future. But it points out to the 7 antitypical brothers of David. God gave them time to prove themselves. But their time passed one by one. All the obedience in the Tuhun Beast domain, not even one. It says here in 2TG 44:38, here you note that when the time came, what time? That is the commencement of the harvest, pertain to the living, the judgment for the living. It says, here you note that when the time came, there was not even one among his servants to uphold the work of the harvest. And consequently, the Lord himself did the work without them. 2TG 44, page 38, and B.T. Hotep in 1SR 220 called it wholesale deception. Now, let me read to you the wholesale deception here in 2SR page 98. Illustrated in Isaiah 4 verse 1. And upon his heads, the name of blasphemy, that is resistance of known truth, expression of defiant, impiety, and irreverence towards gods or things held sacred, mocking God's personality and authority. The prophet Isaiah, looking forward to this time of wholesale deception, heeded by so-called spiritual guides, says, and in that day 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own apparel. Only let us be called by thy name, to take away our reproach. This reading is definitely applied in the judgment that pertains to the living, brothers and sisters, rather than to the dead. In 1TG number 30, it says here, page 17, it says, Isaiah 4 verse 1 in 1TG 30:17. The first thing we need to know is the time indicated by the term in that day. The antecedent of the words that day is found in verse 13 and 14 of the preceding chapters, of which the fourth chapter is a continuation. These verses point out that day is the judgment day, the day in which the sanctuary of the church is cleansed. And we already read in 1TG 45, page 12, that is the judgment for the living, brothers and sisters. And that is what's happening today among the media. What is important to them is the name. They are not bothered whether the present truth is bestowed unto them or not. The important for them is name. Look at each one of them, brothers and sisters. Apology. I would like to read this reading, brothers and sisters, and God knows that this is really what I feel. Here in 2TG number 24, on page 24, it says, No, I am not taking pleasure in unveiling this truth. I do it only because I must. God wants His people to have the truth, and so I have no alternative but to tell it. No, it is not only Sunday keepers, brothers and sisters, by which the important to them is the name. You remember, B.T. Hotep says in 1TG, number 42, on page 4 and page 5, as you know, there are now hundreds of church names in the world, as many names as there are isms, all of which are named by the mouth of men. Although God recognizes but one church, many of the names even suggest divine competition. For instance, do not the names Church of Christ and of Church of God make Christ and God competitors? 1TG 42, pages 4 and 5. That is the reality. Can you imagine? The group, the name is the Church of Christ, and the other group is the Church of God, but they were quarreling and bickering each other. So Christ and God, the Father, is quarreling and bickering each other. Look at the division. What is important to them is name. At the time when they read in the Bible, in the writings of B.T. Hotep, the name Bashan, then immediately they called their name Bashan. Look at the experience of B.T. Hotep. That is how you could recognize inspiration. Because when B.T. Hotep named the book Shepherd's Rod, he has no knowledge that it is found in Micah 6 verse 9. But human being, uninspired human being, it is opposite. Because when they found out the name, then they adopt the name to call their movement the name that they discovered, because that is great apostasy. They called their name Bashan, the other is Gilead, the other is Mount Carmel, the other is Branch. Now tell me, is that the description given in the Bible, that the Branch, the Bashan, Gilead, and Carmel, they are quarreling and bickering each other? Divine competition? That is great apostasy. For sure, all the names recorded in the Bible, in reality, that is pointing to the movement which is of God, by which the present truth is bestowed unto them. They are not called Bashan, but the Bashan movement must be the movement by which the present truth has been bestowed by God, although they are not called Bashan. Look at the Seventh-day Adventist Church in 1844. This is the history of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Let us read early writings. In historical prologue, let us read. It says in page 31, in 1860, in connection with the organizing of the publishing work, a name was chosen. Some thought the Church of God would be appropriate, but the sentiment prevailed that the name should reflect the distinctive teachings of the church. They adopted Seventh-day Adventist as their name. But that group of people calling their name Seventh-day Adventist, that is the true Church of God. Although their movement had never called us Church of God, but that is the true Church of God. The Church of God mentioned in the Bible, that is the Seventh-day Adventist Church in that period of time. That is the true Church of Christ. Although their name is not Church of Christ, their name is Seventh-day Adventist, but that is the Church of Christ. Brothers and sisters, I remember the statement in 2SR 133, it says, this unquestionable evidence proves that the movement that arose in 1844 is God's true church and divinely predicted. That is God's true church. That is the church of God. But their name is Seventh-day Adventist. That is very plain, brothers and sisters. So to repeat again, brothers and sisters, what is the most important unto us is to study closely what is the present truth under the seventh seal. Because God's true church is well marked in obedience to present truth. 2SR 125. God's true church is well marked by obedience to present truth. And wherever the present truth is, that is God's church, brothers and sisters. Name is not important, brothers and sisters. Not by its name. In Desire of Ages, it says, I would like to read to you. 107, Desire of Ages, it says here, and now also said the prophet, the axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Now the trees represent organizations. And it says, therefore every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Not by its name, but by its fruit is the value of a tree determined. If the fruit is worthless, the name cannot save the tree from destruction. John declared to the Jews that their standing before God was to be decided by their character and life. Profession was worthless. If their life and character were not in harmony with God's law, they were not His people. Desire of Ages, page 106. But here in 2SR, let me read to you in 198. 2SR, page 198. Let's read the statement. The rejecting of light and present truth is the sin against the Holy Ghost. And whosoever speaketh a word against the Son of Man, it shall be forgiven him. But whosoever speaketh against the Holy Ghost, which is the present truth, it shall not be forgiven him, neither in this world, neither in the world to come. Our attitude towards present truth would either make a tree good and his fruit good, or else make the tree corrupt and his fruit corrupt. For the tree is known by his fruit. Verse 33. Thus present truth has the power to change the individual and fit him for eternal life, and which is the seal of the living God. Say Jesus, verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born of water of the Spirit, he cannot enter into the kingdom of God. John chapter 3, verse 5, 2SR 198. So the value of the tree, brothers and sisters, can be recognized only by the present truth, because God's true church is well marked by obedience to present truth. Let us be God's real people, logical thinkers, not bait hunters. Think it thoroughly. When would be Isaiah 59 verse 16 will be fulfilled? In the time of crisis. What crisis, brothers and sisters? In 2 TG 44:38, it is the time of the judgment for the living. Now, what place by which it says, there was no man? It is not literal. It is a figurative speech. Because if it points out to the literal earth, the only time by which there was no human being is during 1,000 years. But the description in 1SR 150 and also in Bible commentary, it points out to inspired human being. There was no inspired human being. And Sister White says that is United States of America. So it was predicted beforehand, brothers and sisters, that if you believe that there must be an inspired servant to lead God's people from Egypt down to the kingdom, brothers and sisters, that inspired servant cannot be in the United States of America, because God declared, do not expect that I will use any messenger in the United States of America, because that statement, do not expect any truth that will originate in the North Country, meaning God will no longer use any inspired servant from that North Country, and that is United States of America, brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters, the final message is concerning the third angel's message, according to volume 5, page 206, 207. But the final phase of the third angel is the judgment for the living. And the focal point of the judgment for the living is to inform all the candidates to be among the living saints that the judgment for the living is in progress. And it is high time now, brothers and sisters, to study closely the sanctuary doctrine. And to repeat again, brothers and sisters, it is only Elijah that had been predicted beforehand that he will restore all things. The mere fact that that woman, there are two divine laws that had been bestowed unto that woman, that is the moral and ceremonial law. The ceremonial law is concerning the holy feast. And in answerer number 3, page 9, the all-knowing God decreed that the holy feast must be observed on the very day and on the very month by which it was first ordained. And since we have the type is that during the time when ancient Israel were in Egypt, there was no record that God commanded them to observe the feast, not until God takes them out from Egypt. And that is the woman which is clothed with the sun after she went out of Egypt. 2SR page 75. And according to answerer number 3, page 10 and page 11, brothers and sisters, that in order for them to observe the holy feast, God first restored the creation calendar, re-establishing the creation calendar. And that history is the same with the modern Israel. They were in captivity. brothers and sisters, in Egypt, in spiritual Egypt. And they lost sight of the creation calendar. The only calendar which is known to them is the Gregorian calendar. Brothers and sisters, that is very plain. And according to the modern times and the living past, in reality, the Roman only copied the Egyptian calendar with slightest changes, according to the modern times and the living past. And here in tract number 10, on page 38, it says here that the reason that God preserved the weekly cycle throughout the ages for the purpose that in the time of restoration of all things, when the creation calendar will be restored again, they will find no difficulty to restore it and to vindicate its integrity. Tract number 10, page 38, it says, though the nations of today do not follow the biblical monthly calendar, that in no wise alters the fact that the original weekly cycle has never been changed, and as it is entirely independent of both the solar and the lunar calendars, had God not preserved it intact throughout all the ages, the saints now, in the time of restitution of all things, would have great difficulty to restore it and to vindicate its integrity. When will be the time of restitution of all things? 1 TG 28:15, in the period of the judgment for the living. And who will restore it? Antitypical Elijah the Tishbite. And the mere fact that B.T. Hotep had not been able to restore the Bible calendar, he could not be antitypical Elijah the Tishbite. Otherwise, God's promise had never been carried out that when antitypical Elijah the Tishbite will come, he will restore all things. And why is it that it in absolute importance that the Bible calendar must be restored? Because we are now living in antitypical period of time by which God commanded us to observe the moral law and also the holy feast. And it utters the impossibility that we could observe the holy feast without first restoring the Bible calendar, my dear brothers and sisters. And to repeat again, brothers and sisters, the message of the third angel is pointing to two main subjects, the sanctuary doctrine and the beast revelation. The sanctuary doctrine is pointing to Christ's mediatorial work in the heavenly sanctuary. We already read that, story of redemption, 381. And who will explain the sanctuary doctrine, which is judgment for the living? The third angel's message on its final phase. General Conference Special, page 39 and 40, it says, Elijah will be the one to explain it. That the judgment for the living is in progress. That the judgment for the living is in session, brothers and sisters. And that's why in 2SR 164, unless the close of the judgment for the dead and the commencement for the living be made known to us, we would have no present truth. Well, the judgment for the living is in session. But when the judgment for the living is in session, the spirit of prophecy in the church, God's agency on earth, will be the one to proclaim it, that the judgment for the living is in session, actually taking place. And since it is actually taking place, it is high time now, according to 2SR 219, while the judgment for the living is in progress, we need to confess all our sins and put it away. And he who neglect this great privilege will not profit them, only bring damnation to themselves. So in this study, brothers and sisters, we can easily understand that while God is restoring the daily and the sanctuary, the daily is the 10 Commandments moral law, and the sanctuary is pointing to the restoration of the Bible calendar so that we could observe the holy feast, while revealing the plan of redemption. At the same time, the third angel's message is pointing to the beast revelation, exposing all the deception and the traps of the devil, how Satan been able successfully to trodden underfoot the knowledge concerning the daily and the sanctuary. Why is it that God did not reveal the message of the book of Daniel and in the book of Revelation in the generation during the dark ages prior to 1844? The only answer that can be given is because, brothers and sisters, they are not the particular object in view. Or in other words, in the period of the pagan Rome, in the period of ecclesiastical Rome, God permitted that the truth concerning the daily and the sanctuary will be trodden underfoot, brothers and sisters, in that period of time, brothers and sisters, as the groundwork. But the fact is, the reason that God permitted and allowed the exceeding great horn, because they are not the particular object in view. Because in reality, the people will experience grave and resurrection at the time when their proceedings will be in the heavenly sanctuary, At that time, they were lying unconscious in their graves. So the knowledge will only be out of value. And God allowed such occurrence to help us so that we could understand, brothers and sisters. Because the particular object in view is the saints to the people who must know that their cases are on trial, 2 TG 12:30. We, the saints that will no longer to taste that. It is important. And because of that great importance, Satan at the utmost of his ability, he tried his best to hide it from the church. But thank God, according to Consecrated Way to Christian Perfection 104, thank the Lord, God sent this message, and then all things restored, brothers and sisters, so that we could be able now to worship God, brothers and sisters, with two divine laws, the moral law and the ceremonial law. We will continue this subject, brothers and sisters, and hoping the good Lord will bless us and would help us. And may the good Lord strengthen your lives and open your understanding, brothers and sisters. To repeat again, this message is not against you. This message is sent by God to prepare our lives on the oncoming, overflowing scourge, brothers and sisters. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. May the good Lord bless you and have a wonderful evening.